In the shadowed halls of Moonrise Manor, a chilling wail echoes at moonrise, reviving whispers of a deadly family curse. When a priceless emerald necklace vanishes, the village of St. Mary Mead trembles with talk of ghosts. But Miss Jane Marple, with her knitting needles and razor-sharp mind, sees through the fog of fear. As secrets unravel, debts, betrayals, and a hidden phonograph, she exposes a cunning plot masquerading as the supernatural. Can Miss Marple silence the eerie echo and restore peace before treachery strikes again? Chapter 1. The Echo at Moonrise. The autumn wind carried a chill as it swept through the village of St. Mary Mead, rustling the leaves that clung stubbornly to the ancient oaks lining the lane to Moonrise Manor. Miss Jane Marple, with her modest suitcase and a knitted shawl draped over her shoulders, stepped off the evening train at the small station. Her eyes, sharp despite her age, scanned the platform where a single lamppost flickered in the gathering dusk. She had been invited to spend a fortnight with her old school friend, Lady Beatrice Harrow, whose letters had grown increasingly anxious over the past months. Beatrice's latest missive had hinted at something peculiar sound, an eerie echo heard at moonrise that had unsettled her household and revived old village tales of a family curse. Miss Marple adjusted her hat, a sensible affair with a single feather, and spotted the manor's driver, a stout man named Jenkins, waiting by a polished black car. "Miss Marple, ma'am," he greeted, tipping his cap. "Lady Harrow's expecting you. Bit of a to-do up at the manor, I'm afraid." "Is that so, Jenkins?" Miss Marple's voice was gentle but probing, her eyes catching the slight twitch in his expression. "What sort of to-do?" Jenkins hesitated, his hands fidgeting with the car keys. "Just noises, ma'am, strange ones, at night. Folks say it's the old curse, but I don't hold with such nonsense." He opened the car door and Miss Marple slid inside, her mind already turning over his words. Noises, she thought. How very interesting. The drive to Moonrise Manor wound through narrow lanes, past hedgerows and fields silvered by the rising moon. The manor itself stood at the edge of a moor, its stone facade looming like a sentinel against the darkening sky. Its tall windows glowed faintly, and the silhouette of a bell tower, half covered in ivy, jutted from one wing. As the car crunched to a stop on the gravel drive, a low, mournful sound drifted across the Murrah Vale, almost human, that seemed to rise and fall with the wind. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. The echo at Moonrise, she presumed. Beatrice Harrow greeted her at the door, her elegant frame swathed in a velvet shawl, her face pale but warm with affection. She exclaimed, clasping Miss Marple's hands, "I've been at my wits' end. This place, it's not what it was." A cup to Miss Marple. "It's that wretched sound," she said, lowering her voice. "Every night at Moonrise, this echo. The servants are terrified, and the village is buzzing with talk of the Harrow curse. I don't know what to make of it, Jane." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes drifting to the portrait above the fireplace, her stern-faced woman in 18th century dress, her green eyes seeming to follow the room. "Tell me about this curse, Beatrice," she said calmly, "and about who's in the house. One never knows where a clue might lie." Beatrice sighed, settling into an armchair. "The curse is an old story from my husband's family. His ancestor, Lady Eleanor Harrow, was betrayed by her lover and murdered on the moor in 1763. They say her spirit wails at moonrise to warn of treachery in the family. It's nonsense, of course, or it was, until these noises started 3 months ago. Then, last week, Eleanor's emerald necklace, a family heirloom, was stolen from the safe. The village is convinced it's her ghost, angry at us. Miss Marple's eyes gleamed with interest. Stolen, you say? And who knew about the necklace? There's my nephew, Roger Harrow, a dear boy but always in debt, paints landscapes, you know, but they don't sell. His fiancée, Clara Weston, is staying with us, but strict. Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, is a bit of a mystery. He keeps to himself. And my cousin, Dr. Evelyn Marsh, a folklorist, is here researching the Harrow history. Miss Marple nodded, filing each name away. And the echo, when did you first hear it? 3 months ago, just after Evelyn arrived. It's always at moonrise, never a minute late. The servants swear it's Eleanor, but I don't know, Jane. It's so loud, so unearthly, even I'm starting to wonder. They were interrupted by the arrival of Roger Harrow, a tall, handsome man in his 30s, with tousled dark hair and paint-stained cuffs. Aunt Beatrice, you didn't tell me Miss Marple had arrived, he said, flashing a charming smile. Miss Marple returned his smile, noting the faint strain in his eyes. Haunted, Mr. Harrow? Do you believe in ghosts? Roger laughed, but it was forced, not a bit. Probably just the wind in the bell tower. But it's got everyone on edge, especially Clara. He glanced toward the door, where a young woman hovered. Clara Weston, Miss Marple presumed. She was pale, with delicate features and eyes that darted nervously. Miss Marple, this is Clara, Roger said, drawing her forward. Clara, Miss Marple's an old friend of Aunt Beatrice's. She's here, too. Well, sort us out, I hope. Clara managed a weak smile. It's the noise, she whispered. It's so dreadful. I can't sleep. Before Miss Marple could respond, Mrs. Grimes entered, her black dress rustling. Dinner is served, my lady, she said, her voice clipped. The dining room, with its long mahogany table and candelabras, felt oppressively grand. Dr. Evelyn Marsh joined them, a wiry woman with sharp eyes and a notebook tucked under her arm. She spoke eagerly of the curse, detailing Lady Eleanor's tragic story with almost too much enthusiasm. The echo is a fascinating phenomenon, she said, ignoring Clara's shudder. It could be psychosonica manifestation of collective fear or a prank, Roger muttered, earning a glare from Mrs. Grimes. Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, was absent, dining in the servants' hall. Progressed, the conversation turned to the stolen necklace. Beatrice explained it was kept in a safe in the library, accessible only to family members and Mrs. Grimes. The police found no signs of forced entry, she said. It's as if it vanished. She observed Roger's forced cheer, Clara's anxiety, Dr. Marsh's eagerness, and Mrs. Grimes' guarded silence. Echo, what purpose did it serve? As the clock struck 9, the moon rose fully, casting silver light through the windows. And then it came, the echo. It began as a low moan, rising to a piercing wail that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Clara gasped, clutching Roger's arm. Beatrice paled. Dr. Marsh's eyes gleamed with excitement. Mrs. Grimes crossed herself. Miss Marple set her knitting down, her ears attuned to the sound's quality. It was mournful, yes, but oddly mechanical, with a faint metallic edge. Good heavens, Beatrice whispered. There it is again. Miss Marple rose, her movements spry despite her age. Might I see the grounds, Beatrice? A little air might do us good. Beatrice hesitated, but nodded. They stepped onto the terrace, the moor stretching before them. Bathed in moonlight, the echo faded, leaving only the rustle of leaves. Miss Marple's eyes scanned the landscape, settling on the bell tower. That tower, she said, does it still function? Not for years, Beatrice replied. It's locked, mostly. Tom has the key. Miss Marple nodded, her mind racing. A locked tower, a mechanical sound, a stolen necklace, she thought. Of the village gossip she'd heard years ago, how people's fears could be manipulated for gain. Let's go back inside, she said gently. I'm sure we'll get to the bottom of this. That night, as she settled into her guest room, Miss Marple lay awake, listening. The echo did not return, but she heard footsteps in the hall, soft, deliberate. She smiled faintly, and Miss Jane Marple was not one to let restlessness go unexamined. Chapter 2. The Gathering of Suspects. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the sprawling grounds of Moonrise Manor, its golden rays filtering through the ancient oaks that lined the gravel drive. Miss Jane Marple, seated by the drawing-room window, sipped her tea, her keen eyes flitting between the manicured gardens outside and the faces of those gathered within. The room, with its high ceilings and heavy velvet drapes, seemed to hold its breath, as if waiting for the next eerie wail to pierce the air. The echo from the previous night still lingered in everyone's thoughts, a spectral thread weaving tension through the household. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her silver hair impeccably styled, stood near the fireplace, her posture regal, but her hands betraying a slight tremor as she adjusted a porcelain figurine on the mantel. She had invited Miss Marple to Moonrise Manor for what she described as a quiet visit, but the events of the previous evening had shattered any pretense of tranquility. Beatrice's invitation had been warm, almost nostalgic, recalling their shared schoolgirl days, but Miss Marple sensed an undercurrent of urgency in her friend's letter. Now, as Beatrice turned to address the room, her voice carried the weight of someone accustomed to command, yet softened by unease. "My dear Jane," Beatrice began, her eyes meeting Miss Marple's with a flicker of gratitude. "I'm so glad you're here. This disturbance last night has unsettled us all, and I thought it best to introduce everyone properly so you might understand the household." She gestured toward the small assembly seated around the room, each person a study in contrasts, their expressions ranging from guarded to outright anxious. Miss Marple set her teacup down with a delicate clink, her hands folding neatly in her lap. She wore her usual attire, tweed skirt, a pale blue cardigan, and a string of pearls that gleamed softly in the firelight. Her appearance was unassuming, almost dowdy, but her eyes sparkled with a quiet intelligence that missed nothing. She nodded encouragingly at Beatrice, her smile gentle, but her mind already cataloguing the faces before her. First was Roger Harrow, Beatrice's nephew, lounging in a high-backed chair with an air of studied nonchalance. He was in his early 30s, with tousled dark hair and a face that might have been called handsome, if not for the faint lines of dissipation around his eyes. His cravat was slightly askew, and his velvet jacket, though stylish, bore the faint creases of frequent wear. Roger was an artist, Beatrice had explained earlier, known in certain London circles for his moody landscapes, but perpetually short. of funds. His charm was evident in the easy smile he flashed at Miss Marple, but there was a restlessness in his movements, a fidgeting with the cuff of his sleeve that suggested debts or secrets or both. Beside him sat Clara Weston, his fiancée, a young woman of delicate beauty whose porcelain skin seemed almost translucent under the strain of the moment. Her auburn hair was pinned up in an elegant chignon, but her hands twisted nervously in the folds of her silk dress, a pale green confection that looked expensive but slightly out of place in the rustic manner. Clara's eyes darted toward Roger whenever he spoke, as if seeking reassurance, but there was a brittleness to her demeanor, a fragility that made Miss Marple wonder what burdens she carried. Beatrice had mentioned that Clara was an heiress, her fortune tied to a shipping magnate's estate, but her wealth seemed to bring her little comfort. Across the room, Mrs. Grimes, the housekeeper, stood ramrod straight near the door, her black dress severe and her gray hair pulled into a tight bun. Her face was a mask of disapproval, her thin lips pressed into a line as she surveyed the gathering. Mrs. Grimes had been with the Harrow family for decades, Beatrice had said, and her loyalty to Moonrise Manor was unquestioned, yet there was something in her sharp, watchful eyes that suggested she saw more than she said. Miss Marple noted the way Mrs. Grimes's hands clasped tightly in front of her, as if guarding a secret she wasn't ready to share. Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, leaned against the far wall, his rough hands stuffed into the pockets of his corduroy trousers. He was a burly man in his late 40s, with weathered skin and a mop of sandy hair streaked with gray. His eyes, a piercing blue, flickered with a wariness that Miss Marple found intriguing. Beatrice had described Tom as indispensable, a man who knew every inch of the estate's sprawling grounds, but village whispers relayed to Miss Marple by Beatrice's maid hinted at a shadowy past. Tom's gaze lingered on Roger, and Miss Marple caught a faint curl of disdain in his expression before he looked away. Finally, there was Dr. Evelyn Marsh, Beatrice's distant cousin, seated near the window with a notebook balanced on her knee. She was a striking woman in her 50s, her dark hair streaked with silver and her eyes sharp behind wire-rimmed spectacles. Dr. Marsh was a folklorist, Beatrice had explained, with a particular interest in the myths and legends of Moonrise Manor. Her tweed suit was practical but well-tailored, and her fingers, ink-stained from years of note-taking, tapped restlessly against her notebook. She had a scholarly air, but there was a fervor in her voice when she spoke of the manor's history, a passion that bordered on obsession. Miss Marple found her intensity both fascinating and slightly unsettling. Beatrice cleared her throat, drawing the room's attention. As you all know, last night's sound has caused quite a stir. I've asked Miss Marple to join us because she has a knack for seeing things clearly, and I trust her judgment. I want us to be open with her to help put this matter to rest. Her words were firm, but there was a plea in her eyes as she looked at each person in turn. Roger leaned forward, his smile wry. Aunt Beatrice, do you really think this is necessary? It was probably just the wind, or some village prankster having a laugh. No need to drag poor Miss Marple into our little drama. His tone was light, but his eyes flicked toward Clara, who gave a small, nervous nod. Nonsense, Roger, Beatrice said sharply. You heard it as well as I did. That wasn't the wind. And with the necklace missing, her voice trailed off, and a heavy silence fell over the room. Ears pricked up at the mention of the necklace. Beatrice had briefly mentioned the theft earlier, family heirloom, an emerald necklace once belonging to Lady Eleanor Harrow, stolen from the manor's safe a week ago. The loss had deepened the household's unease, feeding into the rumors of the curse. Miss Marple made a mental note to ask more about the necklace later, but for now she focused on the people before her. Clara's voice, soft and trembling, broke the silence. I don't like it here when it's like this. That sound last night, it was so awful, like someone crying out in pain. What if it really is Lady Eleanor? Her eyes were wide, and she clutched Roger's hand, her knuckles white. Dr. Marsh looked up from her notebook, her expression a mix of curiosity and exasperation. Clara, my dear, it's likely just an acoustic phenomenon. Moors are notorious for carrying sounds in strange ways, though I must say, it does lend credence to the old stories. She adjusted her spectacles, her tone scholarly but tinged with excitement. The legend of Lady Eleanor is quite specific about the wailing at Moonrise. It's fascinating, really. Fascinating. Mrs. Grimes's voice was sharp, cutting through the room like a blade. There's nothing fascinating about it, Dr. Marsh. It's a disturbance, plain and simple. And it's upsetting, Her Ladyship. We don't need ghost stories to make things worse. Her eyes narrowed at Dr. Marsh, who merely raised an eyebrow. In response, Tom Finch shifted uncomfortably, his boots scuffing the polished floor. "Begging your pardon, ma'am," he said to Beatrice, his voice gruff, "but I've heard that sound before. Years ago, when I first came to the manor. It's not natural, but it ain't no ghost neither. Could be someone's up to mischief on the moor." His gaze slid toward Roger, and Miss Marple caught the accusation in his eyes. Roger bristled, sitting up straighter. "What's that supposed to mean, Finch? If you've got something to say, spit it out." His charm had vanished, replaced by a defensive edge. "Enough." Beatrice's voice rang out, silencing the brewing argument. "I won't have bickering in this house. Miss Marple is here to help, and I expect you all to cooperate. Jane, perhaps you'd like to ask some questions." She turned to Miss Marple, her expression hopeful. Miss Marple smiled, her demeanor as calm as ever. "Thank you, Beatrice. I'd like to hear a bit more about last night. Perhaps each of you could share where you were when the echo sounded and what you made of it." Her tone was mild, but her eyes were sharp, taking in every reaction. Roger spoke first, his voice regaining its easy charm. "I was in my studio, working on a canvas. The moon was just rising, and I heard that awful wail. Thought it was some animal at first, a fox, maybe, but it went on too long. I stepped outside to look, but I didn't see anything, just the moor, all misty and quiet." He shrugged, but his fingers drummed nervously on the arm of his chair. Clara's voice was barely above a whisper. "I was in my room, reading. I couldn't sleep after I heard it. It was so loud, like it was right outside my window. I didn't dare look out." Her hands twisted in her lap, and Miss Marple noted the way she avoided meeting anyone's eyes. Mrs. Grimes folded her arms, her expression stern. "I was in the kitchen, seeing to the evening's accounts. The sound came through the window, clear as anything. I checked the doors and windows after, but everything was locked tight. No one got in or out. I'd swear to it." Her tone was defiant, as if daring anyone to contradict her. Tom Finch scratched his jaw, his eyes narrowing. I was out by the stables, checking the horses. That sound carried across the moor, no mistake. I walked the grounds after, but didn't find nothing out of place. Still, it's not the first time I've heard it. Like I said, he glanced at Miss Marple, his expression unreadable. Dr. Marsh closed her notebook with a snap. I was in the library, transcribing some old letters I found in the attic. The echo was remarkably almost musical in its cadence. I noted the time, of course, exactly 10 minutes past moonrise. It's consistent with the legend, you see. She smiled faintly, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of calculation in her eyes. Miss Marple nodded, her mind already piecing together the fragments of their stories. The alibis were vague, the reactions varied, and the tension between them was palpable. Roger's defensiveness, Clara's fear, Mrs. Grimes's rigidity, Tom's suspicion, and Dr. Marsh's academic detachment each told a story of its own. And then there was the necklace, a missing piece that seemed to hover over the room like the echo itself. Beatrice spoke again, her voice softer now. "Jane, do you think this could be connected to the theft? The necklace was taken just days before this ... noise started. It's too much of a coincidence, don't you think?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression thoughtful. "It's possible, Beatrice. Coincidences are often less coincidental than they seem. I'd like to know more about this necklace, its history, who knew about it, and who had access to the safe. But for now, I think it's best we all try to remain calm and keep our eyes open." Her tone was reassuring, but her mind was racing, already drawing parallels to a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, where a stolen brooch had unraveled a web of deceit as the group dispersed. Miss Marple lingered by the window, watching the moon begin its slow ascent over the moor. The manor was a puzzle, its inhabitants pieces that didn't quite fit. The echo, the theft, the curse were threads in a tapestry she was determined to unravel. She thought of her neighbor, Mrs. Price, who had once dismissed a village rumor only to find it held a kernel of truth. People, Miss Marple knew, were rarely what they seemed, and Moonrise Manor was no exception. Dinner that evening was a strained affair. The clink of silverware and the murmur of polite conversation barely masking the undercurrents of suspicion. Roger tried to lighten the mood with a story about a London gallery owner, but his laughter rang hollow. Clara picked at her food, her eyes darting toward the windows, as if expecting the echo to sound again. Mrs. Grimes served the meal with her usual efficiency, but her movements were brisk, almost angry. Tom, invited to join them at Beatrice's insistence, ate in silence, his presence an uneasy reminder of the divide between staff and family. Dr. Marsh, meanwhile, peppered the conversation with references to folklore, her enthusiasm undimmed by the others' discomfort. Miss Marple observed it all, her small, bird-like presence almost forgotten in the tension. She noted how Roger's hand lingered on Clara's when he thought no one was watching, how Mrs. Grimes's eyes followed Dr. Marsh with barely concealed distrust, how Tom's fork paused when Beatrice mentioned the necklace. Each gesture, each glance was a clue, and Miss Marple stored them away, her mind as sharp as the knitting needles she carried in her bag. As the meal ended, Beatrice rose, her face pale but composed. "I think we could all use some rest," she said. "Jane, you'll stay in the blue room, as we discussed. I hope you'll find it comfortable." She hesitated. "Whatever it is? Miss Marple smiled, her eyes crinkling with warmth. I'll do my best, Beatrice. A good night's sleep often brings clarity, don't you think? But as she followed the maid to her room, her thoughts were far from sleep. The echo at Moonrise was no ghost. She was certain it was a signal, a distraction, or perhaps a warning. And the people in this house, with their secrets and their fears, held the key to unraveling it. In the blue room, with its faded wallpaper and heavy oak furniture, Miss Marple sat by the window, her knitting in her lap. The moon was higher now, casting a silver glow over the moor. She thought of the household, of Roger's debts and Clara's nerves, of Mrs. Grimes's loyalty and Tom's wariness, of Dr. Marsh's fervor and Beatrice's quiet strength. Somewhere among them was the truth, and Miss Marple, with her instinct for human nature, was determined to find it. The night was still, but Miss Marple knew it wouldn't stay that way. The echo would sound again, and when it did, she would be ready. Chapter 3. The Legend of the Curse. Miss Jane Marple sat in the drawing room of Moonrise Manor, her knitting needles clicking softly in a rhythm that was as steady as her thoughts. The room was warm, the fire crackling in the hearth, casting flickering shadows across the heavy oak paneling and the faded tapestries that adorned the walls. Lady Beatrice Harrow, her old friend, sat opposite her, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though her fingers betrayed a slight tremble. The household had gathered at Beatrice's insistence, a collection of uneasy faces, illuminated by the soft glow of the chandelier above. The eerie echo from the previous night still lingered in their minds, a spectral presence that seemed to hover over the room like an uninvited guest. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, Beatrice's distant cousin and a with a penchant for the dramatic, stood near the fireplace, her sharp eyes gleaming with a mix of excitement and authority. She had been invited to Moonrise Manor to research its history, and it was clear she relished the opportunity to hold court. Her dark hair was pulled back tightly, accentuating the angular lines of her face, and her voice carried a measured cadence, as if she were delivering a lecture to a university hall rather than addressing a small, tense gathering in a rural manor. "I suppose," Dr. Marsh began, her tone carrying the weight of someone who believed she was about to unveil a great truth, "it's time we discussed the legend in full. The echo we heard last night is no mere coincidence. It's tied to the curse of Lady Eleanor Harrow, a story that has haunted this family for centuries." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, her eyes lifting to study Dr. Marsh. There was something in the woman's demeanor. She resumed her knitting, her face a mask of polite attention, but her mind was already sifting through the details, searching for the threads that didn't quite align. Beatrice, ever the gracious hostess, nodded encouragingly. "Do go on, Evelyn. I think it's best we all understand what we're dealing with. This sound has unsettled us all." Her voice wavered slightly, and she glanced toward her nephew, Roger Harrow, who lounged in an armchair with an air of studied indifference. His fiancée, Clara Weston, sat beside him, her delicate hands twisting a handkerchief into knots. The stern housekeeper, Mrs. Grimes, stood near the door, her lips pressed into a thin line, while Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, leaned against the wall, his weathered face unreadable. Dr. Marsh cleared her throat, clearly enjoying the attention. "The legend dates back to the early 18th century, to the time of Lady Eleanor Harrow, a woman of remarkable beauty and intellect, but also one cursed by betrayal Eleanor was the wife of Lord Alistair Harrow, a man known for his ambition and ruthlessness. The story goes that Alistair, driven by greed, sought to secure a lucrative alliance with a rival family, the Davenports. To seal this pact, he promised Eleanor's hand to their eldest son, despite her protests and her love for another, a young poet named William Cade, who had no title or fortune to offer. Miss Marple's eyes flicked toward Roger, whose jaw tightened at the mention of betrayal. Clara reached for his hand, but he pulled it away, his gaze fixed on the fire. Interesting, Miss Marple thought. Filing the observation away, Dr. Marsh continued, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. Eleanor refused to comply, but Alistair's spies discovered their tryst. In a fit of rage, he lured Eleanor to the old bell tower, the very one that stands on the manor's grounds today, and there he murdered her. Some say he stabbed her through the heart. Others claim he pushed her from the tower's height. Either way, her blood stained the stones, and her spirit never left. Clara let out a small gasp, her eyes wide. "That's horrific," she whispered, clutching her handkerchief tighter. Roger snorted softly, but Miss Marple noticed. His knuckles were white where they gripped the armrest. "The curse," Dr. Marsh said, her voice rising with theatrical flair, "was born that night. Eleanor's dying breath carried a vow. She would haunt the Harrows, her wail echoing at Moonrise whenever treachery threatened the family, and so it has been for generations. Whenever deceit or betrayal looms, her cry is heard, a warning, or perhaps a call for justice." Mrs. Grimes shifted uncomfortably, her hands smoothing her apron. "Superstition, if you ask me," she muttered, though her tone lacked conviction. Tom Finch remained silent, his eyes fixed on the floor, but Miss Marple caught the faintest twitch of his mouth, as if he were suppressing a thought. Beatrice leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "Evelyn, you've studied the family archives. Is there any truth to this? I mean, beyond the stories? And what about the necklace, Eleanor? Emerald necklace. It's gone missing, and now this echo. It's too much to dismiss as coincidence." Dr. Marsh's expression softened, though Miss Marple sensed a calculated shift in her demeanor. "The necklace is central to the legend," she said. "It was a gift from William to Eleanor, a single emerald set in silver, said to symbolize their love. After her death, Alistair kept it, perhaps out of guilt or as a trophy. It's been passed down through the family, but its history is fraught. There are records, letters, diaries that suggest it's been stolen before, only to reappear under mysterious circumstances. Its theft now, just as the echo has returned, is suggestive, don't you think?" Miss Marple tilted her head, her needles moving steadily. "Suggestive of what, exactly, Dr. Marsh?" she asked, her voice mild but her eyes sharp. Dr. Marsh hesitated, as if caught off guard by the question. "Well, that the curse is active, of course, that someone in this house may be hiding a betrayal, just as Alistair did all those years ago." A heavy silence fell over the room. Roger stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "This is nonsense," he said, his voice tight. "Ghosts and curses. We're not living in the 18th century. The necklace was stolen, fine, but it's probably some petty thief, not a spectral warning, and that echo, it's just the wind, or something else." He waved a hand dismissively, but his eyes darted toward the window, where the moon was beginning to rise over the moor. Clara touched his arm. "Roger, please, what if there's something to it? I felt something last night. It wasn't just the wind. Clara, don't be ridiculous, he snapped, then softened, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, darling. It's just, this is all getting out of hand. Miss Marple watched the exchange closely, noting Clara's pale face and Roger's quick temper. She turned to Dr. Marsh. You mentioned records, Dr. Marsh. Have you found anything specific in the archives about the echo itself? Descriptions of its sound, perhaps, or when it was last heard? Dr. Marsh nodded, clearly pleased to be back in her element. Oh yes, the archives are quite detailed. There's a diary from 1823, written by a Harrow governess, that describes the echo as a wailing cry, like a woman in torment. It was heard during a scandal involving a stolen inheritance. Then, in 1876, a groundskeeper reported it before a fire broke out in the West Wingerson. They suspected, though no one was ever charged. And in 1912, it was heard again, just before a Harrow cousin disappeared with family jewels. The pattern is clear. The echo precedes betrayal or loss. Miss Marple nodded thoughtfully, her mind working through the details. And the necklace do? The records mention where it was kept, or who had access to it? Beatrice answered, before Dr. Marsh could. It was always kept in the safe in my study, Jane. Only I had the combination, though. Well, I suppose anyone could have seen me open it. I wasn't always careful. She looked down, a flush of embarrassment coloring her cheeks. Mrs. Grimes spoke up, her voice sharp. If you'll pardon me, my lady, that's not entirely true. Mr. Roger knew where the key to the study was kept, and he's been in there often enough, hasn't he? Roger's face reddened. Are you accusing me, Mrs. Grimes? I've never touched that blasted necklace. I don't need a time, an artist, not a jewel thief. Enough, Beatrice said, raising a hand. This is getting us nowhere. Jane, what do you make of all this? You've always had a knack for seeing through nonsense. Miss Marple smiled faintly, setting her knitting in her lap. I think, Beatrice, that legends are like old lace, beautiful, but full of holes when you look closely. Dr. Marsh's story is fascinating, but I wonder, is the echo truly a warning, or is it being used to make us think it is? And the necklace's theft feels too convenient, too tied to this ghostly tale. I'd like to know more about who benefits from its loss, and who might want us all looking at shadows instead of facts. The room went quiet again, her words hanging in the air. Dr. Marsh's smile faltered, and Miss Marple noted the brief flash of unease in her eyes. Tom Finch shifted, his boots creaking against the floor. Clara stared at her hands, while Roger's gaze flicked toward the door, as if he longed to escape. Beatrice sighed. You're right, Jane. We need facts, not stories. But where do we start? With small things, Miss Marple said softly. The truth is always in the small things. For now, I'd like to see the bell tower tomorrow. It's mentioned so often in the legend it might tell us something. Dr. Marsh's eyebrows rose. The bell tower. It's in disrepair, Miss Marple. Hardly worth your time. Oh, I'm sure it has its secrets, Miss Marple replied, her tone light but her eyes keen. Old places always do. As the gathering dispersed, Miss Marple lingered, watching the household retreat to their corners of the manor. Roger and Clara whispered heatedly in the hallway, their voices low but tense. Mrs. Grimes bustled off to the kitchen, her movements brisk but her shoulders stiff. Tom Finch slipped outside, his silhouette vanishing into the moonlit grounds. Dr. Marsh remained by the fire, her fingers tapping against a notebook, her expression unreadable. Miss Marple picked up her knitting again, her mind weaving a pattern far more intricate than the scarf in her hands. The legend of Lady Eleanor was compelling, but it was the living, not the dead, who interested her. The echo, the necklace, the strained glances. She sensed a web of motives, each thread leading to a truth that had nothing to do with ghosts. Dr. Marsh's story was too neat, too perfectly timed with the theft, Roger's debts, Clara's nervousness, Mrs. Grimes's accusations, Tom's silence. Each was a piece of the puzzle, and the bell tower, she suspected, was where they might begin to fit together. She thought of her garden back in St. Mary Mead, where weeds often hid among the flowers, indistinguishable until you looked closely. This manor was much the same, she mused. Someone was cultivating fear, planting distractions to hide their own ends. And Miss Marple, with her quiet patience and sharp eyes, intended to root them out. The moon rose higher, casting its silver light across the moor. Somewhere in the distance, the echo sounded again, a faint, mournful wail that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. But to Miss Marple, it was not the cry of a ghost. It was the sound of a secret waiting to be uncovered. The next morning, Miss Marple rose early, her habits as disciplined as ever. She took her tea in the conservatory, where the glass walls offered a view of the moor stretching toward the horizon. The bell tower loomed in the distance, its weathered stones stark against the pale dawn sky. Beatrice joined her, looking weary but determined. "I couldn't sleep," Beatrice confessed, stirring her tea absently. "That story Evelyn told. It's unsettling, even if I don't believe in curses. And the necklace, it's not just its value, Jane. It's part of the family, part of who we are." Miss Marple nodded sympathetically. "Losing something precious is always painful, Beatrice. But I suspect the necklace isn't far. Tell me, who else has been in the study recently? Anyone unusual?" Beatrice frowned, thinking, "Well, Roger, of course. He's always in there, sketching or reading. Clara's been in a few times, asking about family history. She's curious about the Harrow lineage, or so she says. Mrs. Grimes tidies the room daily, and Tom was in last week, fixing a window latch. Evelyn's been there often, poring over the archives. I don't know, Janet. Could be any of them, or none, or someone else entirely," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "What about visitors? Tradesmen, perhaps, or friends?" Beatrice shook her head. "No one unusual. The jeweler came a month ago to appraise the necklace for insurance, but he's reputable. Sir Henry recommended him, actually." Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. "Sir Henry Clithering? I'll have to ask him about that when he arrives." Beatrice brightened. "Oh, is he coming? That's a relief. He's so sensible, he'll know what to do." "He's very capable," Miss Marple agreed, though her mind was elsewhere. A jeweler, recommended by Sir Henry, had seen the necklace. Recently, Clara had been meeting a jeweler in town. Coincidence, perhaps. But Miss Marple didn't believe in coincidences, not when an emerald necklace and a ghostly echo were involved. After breakfast, Miss Marple strolled the grounds, her shawl wrapped tightly against the morning chill. The moor was vast and desolate, its heather and gorse stretching toward the horizon, broken only by the occasional twisted tree or crumbling stone wall. The bell tower stood at the edge of the estate, its silhouette stark against the sky. It was a squat, sturdy structure, its stones moss-covered and weathered by centuries of wind and rain. The bell itself had long since been removed, but the tower's narrow windows and heavy wooden door gave it an air of mystery as she approached. She noticed Tom Finch working nearby, pruning a hedge with deliberate care. He glanced up, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said, his voice gruff but polite. "Come to see the tower?" "I thought it might be interesting," she replied, her tone light. "It's such a prominent feature in Dr. Marsh's story." Tom snorted. "Stories, that's all they are. This place is old, sure, but ghosts, just tales to scare the maids." Miss Marple smiled. "Perhaps, but the echo is real enough, isn't it? Have you ever heard it before, Mr. Finch?" He hesitated, his shears pausing mid-cut. "Can't say I have, not till this week. Sounds like wind caught in the stones. If you ask me, perhaps," Miss Marple said again, her eyes drifting to the tower. "Do you ever go inside, Mr. Finch? To check for repairs, perhaps?" "Not often," he said quickly. "It's locked, mostly. Mrs. Grimes has the key, or Lady Beatrice." In his reply, "Thank you, Mr. Finch. I won't keep you from your work," she continued, toward the tower, her steps slow but purposeful. The door was indeed locked, but the lock was old, its iron rusted. She ran a finger along the frame, noticing faint scratches, recent, perhaps, though they could have been made by anything. The windows were too high to peer through, but she circled the structure, her eyes scanning the ground. A scrap of cloth, caught on a thorn bush nearby, caught her attention. It was small, barely noticeable, but its pale blue color stood out against the drab moor. She tucked it into her pocket, her mind already considering its significance. Back at the manor, she found Clara in the library, leafing through a book on local folklore. The young woman started when Miss Marple entered, her face pale. "Oh, Miss Marple, I didn't hear you." "My apologies, my dear," Miss Marple said, settling into a chair. "You seem fond of history." Clara blushed, closing the book. "Not exactly. I thought it might help me understand Roger's family better. He's so proud of being a Harrow, but he doesn't talk much about the past." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes kind but searching. "It's good to take an interest. Have you found anything interesting about the necklace? Perhaps it's such a striking piece. Just what Dr. Marsh said." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone soothing. "You must be worried about Roger, with all this talk of theft and curses." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "I am. He's under so much pressure, his art, his debts. He doesn't deserve this suspicion." "Cause," Miss Marple said gently. "But sometimes people hide things, even from those they love. If you know anything, my dear, it's better to share it now." Clara shook her head, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know anything, I swear." Miss Marple patted her hand, her touch warm but her mind cold and clear. Clara was frightened, that much was certain, but whether of ghosts or something more tangible, she couldn't yet say. The day passed quietly, but tension simmered beneath the manor's polite surface. At dinner, the conversation was strained, with Roger drinking more than usual and Dr. Marsh dominating the discussion with tales of other local legends. Mrs. Grimes served the meal with her usual efficiency, but Miss Marple noticed her eyes darting toward the windows whenever the wind stirred. Tom Finch was absent, claiming a task in the stables, though Miss Marple wondered if he was avoiding the gathering. As the moon rose, the echoes sounded again, sharper and more insistent than before. Clara dropped her glass, the shatter echoing in the dining room. Roger cursed under his breath, and Beatrice gripped the table, her face pale. Dr. Marsh's eyes gleamed, as if the sound were a personal triumph. Miss Marple excused herself, claiming fatigue, but instead slipped into the garden, her shawl drawn tight. She stood in the shadow of the manor, listening. The echo came again, and this time she was certain it wasn't coming from the moor. It was closer, its source somewhere within the estate. She thought of the bell tower, its hollow structure, perfect for amplifying sound. And she thought of the phonograph, an idea forming in her mind. Back in her room, she sat by the window, her knitting untouched. The legend of Lady Eleanor was a distraction, she was sure of it. Someone was using it, weaving fear to mask their actions. The necklace, the echo, the uneasy household, it all pointed to a human hand, not a ghostly one. And tomorrow, in the bell tower, she would begin to unravel the truth. She smiled faintly, thinking of her friend Dolly Bantry, back in St. Mary Mead, who would no doubt find this all terribly thrilling. People are the same everywhere, Miss Marple murmured to herself, ghosts or no ghosts, it's always the heart that betrays them. The moon hung high, its light casting long shadows across the manor. The echo faded, and the night grew still. But Miss Marple's mind was anything but still, already piecing together the threads of a mystery that was far from supernatural. Chapter 4. A midnight disturbance. The moon hung low over Moonrise Manor, casting a pale, silvery glow across the sprawling estate. Its light filtered through the ancient oaks, their gnarled branches clawing at the sky, and spilled onto the moor beyond, where the heather swayed in the night breeze. The household had retired for the evening, the heavy silence of the old manor broken only by the occasional creak of settling wood or the distant hoot of an owl. Miss Jane Marple, however, was not asleep. She sat in her guest room, a modest chamber, with faded floral wallpaper and a four-poster bed, her knitting needles clicking softly as she worked on a pale blue shawl. Her eyes, sharp and alert despite the late hour, were fixed on the window, where the moon's glow seemed to pulse with an almost unnatural intensity. The eerie wail came just after midnight, slicing through the stillness like a knife. It was louder than the previous night, more insistent, a keening sound that seemed to rise from the moor itself, echoing off the stone walls of the manor. Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her movements calm and deliberate, and rose to her feet. She slipped on her dressing gown, a sensible garment of soft gray wool, and stepped into the corridor. The house was stirring now, doors opening, voices murmuring in alarm. She moved toward the staircase, her small figure almost ghostly in the dim light, and descended to the main hall where the household was gathering. Lady Beatrice Harrow stood at the foot of the stairs, her silver hair loose around her shoulders, her face pale but composed. She clutched a candelabra, its flickering flames casting long shadows on the oak-paneled walls. "Jane," she said, her voice steady but tinged with unease, "did you hear it? That dreadful sound again?" Miss Marple nodded, her expression serene. "Indeed, Beatrice, it's quite unmistakable. Shall we see who else is about? Roger Harrow was the first to appear, his dark hair disheveled, his silk dressing gown hastily tied. His eyes were wide, and he gripped the banister as he descended. "I saw something," he said, his voice low and urgent. "Out there, on the moor, a figure, moving near the edge of the trees. It was too dark to make out details, but I swear it wasn't my imagination." Clara Weston followed close behind, her delicate frame wrapped in a cream-colored shawl. Her face was ashen, her blue eyes darting nervously. "It's her," she whispered, clutching Roger's arm. "Lady Eleanor, the ghost." Her voice rose, trembling on the edge of hysteria. "Nonsense," said Mrs. Grimes, the housekeeper, emerging from the servants' corridor. Her stern features were set in a scowl, her gray hair pulled tightly into a bun even at this hour. She carried a lantern, its harsh light illuminating the deep lines of her face. "Ghosts don't wander moors or wail like banshees. It's some trick, mark my words." Dr. Evelyn Marsh appeared last, her scholarly demeanor unruffled despite the hour. She wore a long, dark robe, and her glasses glinted in the candlelight as she adjusted them. "Fascinating," she murmured, almost to herself. "The echo's timbre has shifted slightly tonight, more resonant, perhaps. It aligns with the oral traditions I've studied, where spectral phenomena intensify under certain lunar phases." Miss Marple observed them all, her gaze moving from one face to another, noting the tension in Roger's jaw, the tremor in Clara's hands, the defensive tilt of Mrs. Grimes's chin, and the calculated calm in Dr. Marsh's eyes. "Perhaps," she said mildly, "we might all benefit from a closer look at where this sound is coming from. Beatrice, would you mind if we stepped outside?" Beatrice hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Jane, but we must stay together. The moor is treacherous at night." The group, an uneasy assembly of suspicion and fear, followed Beatrice through the heavy oak doors of the manor. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of damp earth and heather. The moor stretched before them, a vast expanse of shadow and silver, its contours softened by the moonlight. The echo had faded, but the memory of it lingered, a chill that seemed to seep into their bones. Roger pointed toward a copse of trees at the edge of the moor, where the ground dipped into a shallow valley. "There," he said, "that's where I saw it, just a shape, moving quickly. It could have been a person, but it didn't move like one." Clara shivered, pressing closer to him. "It's the ghost," she insisted. "Lady Eleanor's spirit, bound to this place. The curse is real. Roger, we should leave." Miss Marple, walking a few steps behind, paused to study the ground. The grass was damp, but there were no clear footprints, no signs of disturbance. She glanced toward the manor, her eyes settling on the bell tower, a squat stone structure attached to the west wing. Its silhouette loomed against the moonlit sky, and she noted its position relative to the moor. The tower's height and shape suggested it could carry sound far across the landscape, a detail she tucked away for later consideration. "Perhaps," she said aloud, her voice gentle but firm, "we might consider the possibility that this echo is not supernatural at all. Sound can be manipulated, after all. A bell, a horn, even a clever device could produce such an effect." Mrs. Grimes snorted. "Exactly what I've been saying. Someone's playing a cruel joke, and I'd wager it's that groundskeeper, Tom Finch, always skulking about, that one Tom who had joined them silently, bristled at the accusation. His weathered face, usually impassive, tightened with anger. "I've done nothing but my work here," he said, his voice rough. "If there's trickery, look to those with more to gain. I've no reason to scare anyone." Dr. Marsh raised an eyebrow. "The phenomenon could be natural," she said. "Acoustic anomalies are well documented in areas with specific geological features. The moors, valleys, and stone outcrops could amplify a distant sound." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes crinkling at the corners. "An interesting theory, Dr. Marsh, but I wonder if we might find a simpler explanation. Shall we return?" Inside, the night grows cold. Back in the Manor's drawing room, Beatrice ordered tea, and the group sat in uneasy silence as the fire crackled in the hearth. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her mind turning over the night's events. Roger's claim of a shadowy figure intrigued her, not because she believed in ghosts, but because it suggested someone was deliberately fostering fear. Clara's hysteria seemed genuine, yet Miss Marple sensed a thread of calculation beneath it. Mrs. Grimes's quick accusation of Tom was telling, as was Tom's defensive response, and Dr. Marsh's academic detachment struck her as oddly performative, as if she were more interested in the mystery's optics than its resolution. "Beatrice," Miss Marple said, setting her teacup down, "might I have a look at the bell tower tomorrow? It's such an interesting feature of the manor, and I confess I'm curious about its history." Beatrice looked surprised, but nodded. "Of course, Jane. It's been unused for years, but you're welcome to explore it. Though I warn you, it's dusty and rather neglected." Mrs. Grimes's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of unease crossing her face. "There's nothing in that tower but cobwebs and old bells," she said. "No need to go poking about." "Oh, I enjoy a bit of poking about," Miss Marple replied, her tone light. "One never knows what one might find in such places." The conversation turned to other matters, but Miss Marple's attention remained on the tower. She recalled its position, how it overlooked the moor, and how its structure could channel sound. The echo, she suspected, was no ghost's wail, but a deliberate act, designed to unsettle the household and perhaps distract from something more tangible, like the theft of Eleanor's emerald necklace. She thought of her nephew, Raymond's wife, Joan, who had once described a theatrical production where sound effects were used to create an illusion of the supernatural. The principle was simple. A well-placed device could mimic a ghost's cry, and a tower could amplify it. As the household dispersed to their rooms, Miss Marple lingered in the drawing room. Her knitting resumed, but her mind elsewhere. She considered the motives at play. Roger, burdened by debt, might have staged the echo to divert attention from the necklace's theft, though his fear seemed genuine. Clara's insistence on the ghost suggested either true belief or a performance to cover her own actions. Mrs. Grimes's defensiveness hinted at knowledge she wasn't sharing, while Tom's reticence suggested a man with secrets but not necessarily guilt, and Dr. Marsh, her fascination with the curse, felt too convenient, as if she were shaping the narrative to fit her own ends. The clock struck 1, its chimes echoing faintly through the manor. Miss Marple rose, her shawl draped over her shoulders, and made her way to her room. She paused at the window, gazing out at the moor, where the moon now hung higher, its light softer but no less eerie. The echo had not returned, but she knew it would. Someone in this house was orchestrating fear, and she intended to find out who and why. The next morning dawned gray and misty, the moor shrouded in a damp haze that clung to the manor's stone walls. Miss Marple, dressed in a tweed skirt and a cardigan of soft lavender, joined Beatrice for breakfast in the dining room. The table was set with fine china, but the atmosphere was strained, the previous night's disturbance lingering like an unwelcome guest. Roger was absent, having claimed a headache, but Clara sat picking at her toast, her eyes red-rimmed. Mrs. Grimes served the meal with her usual efficiency, her expression unreadable. Dr. Marsh, by contrast, was animated, scribbling notes in a leather-bound journal as she sipped her coffee. "The echo's intensity last night," she said, "suggests a pattern. I'd like to measure its frequency tonight, perhaps set up some equipment on the moor." Beatrice frowned. "I'd rather we didn't encourage this talk of ghosts, Evelyn. It's upsetting, Clara." Clara nodded, her voice small. "I can't sleep, Beatrice. Every time I close my eyes, I hear that wail. It's as if she's calling to me." Miss Marple buttered her scone, her movements precise. "It's curious, isn't it," she said, "how the sound seems to affect us all differently. I find it rather intriguing, like a puzzle waiting to be solved." Mrs. Grimes set a teapot down with a thud. "Puzzles are all well and good, Miss Marple, but this is a house of honest folk. If there's mischief, it's from outside, not within." Tom Finch entered then, his boots muddy from the morning's work. He tipped his cap to Beatrice, ignoring Mrs. Grimes's glare. "Moor's quiet today," he said. "No signs of anyone out there last night. I checked the paths at first light." "Thank you, Tom," Beatrice said, her tone weary. "Perhaps it was just the wind, as Evelyn suggested." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Tom, noting the slight tension in his shoulders. "You must know the moor well, Mr. Finch," she said. "Have you ever heard such a sound before, in all your years here?" Tom hesitated, his weathered hands flexing. "Not like that, Miss. The moor's got its noises, whined birds, the odd fox, but that wail, it's new. Started just after the necklace went missing." Miss Marple nodded, filing the information away. The timing of the echo's appearance was no coincidence, she was certain. After breakfast, she excused herself and made her way to the bell tower, a narrow stone staircase leading to its entrance. The door was heavy, its hinges rusted, and it creaked as she pushed it open. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and the faint scent of oil lingered. The tower was small, its walls lined with cracked stone, and a single massive bell hung from the rafters, its surface tarnished but intact. She moved carefully, her eyes scanning the floor. In a shadowed corner, half hidden by a pile of old crates, she spotted something that made her pause. A small wooden box, its lid slightly ajar. Kneeling, she opened it and found a phonograph, its needle resting on a scratched record. The device was old but functional, and a thin layer of dust suggested it had been recently disturbed. She examined the record, noting its worn grooves, and considered the implications. Someone had placed this here, she thought, to create the echo. But who, and to what end? She closed the box and stood, brushing dust from her skirt. She would keep this discovery to herself for now, but it confirmed her suspicion. The echo was no ghost's cry, but a calculated act. As she descended the stairs, she heard footsteps in the corridor below. Mrs. Grimes appeared, her face tight with suspicion. "Find anything interesting, Miss Marple?" she asked, her tone sharp. "Oh, just dust and memories," Miss Marple replied, her smile disarming. "But I do think this tower has stories to tell, don't you?" Mrs. Grimes's eyes narrowed, but she said nothing, turning back to her duties. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning over the puzzle. The phonograph was a clue, but it raised more questions. Who had access to the tower? Who knew enough about sound to use it as a weapon? And why go to such lengths to mimic a ghost? That afternoon, Miss Marple took a walk on the moor, her sturdy shoes sinking slightly into the damp earth. The mist had lifted, revealing the landscape's stark beauty, rolling hills of heather, dotted with jagged stones, and the distant outline of the village of St. Mary Mead. She paused near the copse Roger had mentioned, searching for signs of his shadowy figure. The ground was soft, but she found no clear tracks, only a broken twig and a scrap of fabric caught on a thorn. It was blue, like Clara's shawl, but too small to be certain. She returned to the manor as the sun dipped low, her thoughts a tangle of possibilities. The echo, the necklace, the figure on the moor, they were pieces of a larger picture, one she was determined to assemble. At dinner that evening, the tension was palpable. Roger, recovered from his headache, was sullen, his eyes fixed on his plate. Clara clung to his arm, her face pale. Mrs. Grimes served with a grim efficiency, while Dr. Marsh continued her theorizing, oblivious to the discomfort around her. Beatrice, trying to lighten the mood, spoke of the manor's history, but her words faltered as the echo sounded again, fainter this time, but unmistakable. Clara gasped, her fork clattering to the table. Roger stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "I've had enough of this," he said. "I'm going out there. If it's a person, I'll find them." "Roger, no," Clara cried, but he was already striding toward the door. Miss Marple rose, her voice calm. "Perhaps we should all go. Together, we might see something, Roger, Mrs." The group ventured out once more, their lanterns casting pools of light on the moor. Roger led the way, his steps purposeful, while Clara trailed behind, her shawl clutched tightly. Miss Marple stayed near Beatrice, her eyes scanning the shadows. The echo faded, leaving only the wind's low moan. They reached the copse, but there was no figure, no sign of movement. Roger cursed under his breath, his frustration evident as they turned back. Miss Marple lingered, her gaze returning to the bell tower. Its silhouette was stark against the moon, and she imagined the phonograph's needle spinning, its sound carried across the moor. Someone was watching them, she thought, someone who knew their fears and used them. She would need to be patient, to watch and listen, as she always did. The truth, she knew, would reveal itself in time, like a stitch dropped in a pattern, unnoticed, until the whole fabric unraveled. Back at the manor, the household retired, but Miss Marple sat by her window, her knitting idle in her lap. The moor was silent now, but the echo's memory lingered, a challenge she was ready to meet. She thought of her friend Dolly Bantry, who had once laughed at her knack for seeing through village intrigues. "You're like a spider, Jane," Dolly had said, "sitting quietly in your web, waiting for the truth to stumble in." Miss Marple smiled at the memory. The web was set, and the truth, she was certain, would not be long in coming. The next day brought no new disturbances, but the manor felt heavier, as if the echo's weight pressed on every room. Miss Marple spent the morning in the library, poring over old maps of the estate. She noted the bell tower's position, how it aligned with the moor's valleys, and how sound might travel. She also found a reference to an old smuggling route, long abandoned, that ran near the manor. It was a small detail, but it piqued her interest. Smugglers, she knew, were adept at deception, and deception was at the heart of this mystery. At lunch, Roger announced his intention to search the moor again, this time with Tom. Clara protested, but he was adamant. "There, I'll find them," he said. "And if it's a ghost, well, I'll have words with Lady Eleanor myself." Dr. Marsh smiled faintly. "A brave sentiment, Roger, but the supernatural doesn't respond to bravado. If you'd allow me to set up my equipment, I could." "No more equipment," Beatrice interrupted, her voice sharp. "This is my home, Evelyn, not your laboratory." Miss Marple watched the exchange, noting Dr. Marsh's quick recovery, her smile unwavering. "She's clever," Miss Marple thought. "Too clever, perhaps." The afternoon passed quietly, but Miss Marple's mind was anything but still. She spoke with Tom privately, asking about the moor's paths and any unusual visitors. He was guarded, but admitted to seeing lights near the copse a week ago, before the echo began. "Could have been poachers," he said, "but they don't usually come so close." That evening, as the household gathered in the drawing room, Miss Marple steered the conversation to the necklace. "It's curious," she said, "how the theft and the echo began so close together. One might almost think they're connected." Mrs. Grimes stiffened, her hands folding tightly in her lap. "Thieves and ghosts don't mix, Miss Marple. The necklace is gone, and that's a crime, not a curse." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "But crimes, like curses, often rely on misdirection, don't you think?" The room fell silent, the weight of her words settling over them. The echo did not sound that night, but Miss Marple knew it would return. The phonograph in the tower was a tool, and someone was wielding it with purpose. She would watch and wait, and when the moment came, she would unravel the truth, as she always did, with the quiet patience of a woman who understood the human heart and its capacity for deception. Chapter 5. The Village Gossip. Miss Jane Marple, with her customary air of quiet determination, set out from Moonrise Manor early the next morning, her sensible shoes crunching on the gravel path that led to the heart of St. Mary Mead. The village, nestled in a gentle valley surrounded by rolling hills and patches of moorland, was a place where secrets, like the morning mist, clung stubbornly to the corners of every conversation. Miss Marple knew this well, having spent much of her life unraveling the threads of human nature in just such a setting. Today, her purpose was clear: to sift through the village gossip, which, like a fine sieve, often separated the trivial from the telling. The air was crisp, with a hint of autumn in the breeze that rustled the leaves of the ancient oaks lining the lane. Miss Marple adjusted her tweed hat, her sharp eyes scanning the familiar landscape. The manor, with its looming silhouette and the eerie echo still ringing in her memory, faded into the distance as she approached the village square. St. Mary Mead was as picturesque as ever, with its thatched cottages, neatly trimmed hedges, and the small church whose steeple rose modestly above the rooftops. Yet beneath this idyllic surface, Miss Marple knew currents of suspicion and rumor flowed as freely as the brook that babbled through the village green. Her first stop was the post office, a hub of local chatter presided over by Miss Hartnell, a woman whose knack for collecting and disseminating news was rivaled only by her enthusiasm for moral pronouncements. The post office was a small, cluttered space, its counter laden with stamps, parcels, and a perpetually steaming kettle. As Miss Marple pushed open the door, a bell jingled, and Miss Hartnell looked up from sorting letters, her spectacles glinting with curiosity. "Why, Miss Marple, what brings you here so early?" Miss Hartnell's voice was bright, but carried the undertone of someone who sensed an opportunity for fresh gossip. "Not trouble up at the manor, I hope." Miss Marple smiled, her expression mild but her eyes keen. "Oh, nothing so dramatic, Miss Hartnell. I'm merely visiting Lady Harrow, and thought I'd catch up on village news. You know how one misses the little details when away from St. Mary Mead." Miss Hartnell needed no further encouragement. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, though the post office was empty, save for an elderly tabby cat dozing on a sack of mail. "Well, there's plenty to tell, I dare say. That business up at Moonrise Manor has the whole village talking. That wailing noise at Moonrise, folk say it's Lady Eleanor's ghost, come back to haunt the Harrows. Mind you, I don't hold with such nonsense, but you can't deny it's queer." Miss Marple nodded, her hands folded neatly in her lap as she settled onto a stool by the counter. "Queer indeed. Have you heard anything specific about the household? Lady Harrow's guests, perhaps?" Miss Hartnell's eyes gleamed. "Oh, I've heard plenty. That nephew of hers, Roger Harrow, charming lad, but no good with money, they say, always borrowing, never paying back. Mrs. Pym at the bakery says he owes her for 3 months' worth of bread and cakes. And that fiancée of his, Clara Weston, nervous as a cat, that one. She's been seen slipping off to Danbury, the next town over, on the quiet. Nobody knows why, but it's not for shopping, I'll wager." Miss Marple tilted her head, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was already cataloguing. "These details, Danbury, you say? That's curious. Perhaps she has family there." "Not that I've heard," Miss Hartnell replied, warming to her theme. "But there's talk she's been meeting someone at the Golden Pheasant, that fancy inn by the station. A man, they say, though no one's got a clear look at him. Shady business, if you ask me. And then there's that groundskeeper, Tom Finch, a rough sort, if ever I saw one. Came to the village 2 years ago, keeps to himself. Mr. Gibbs at the pub says he's seen Tom skulking about at odd hours, carrying bags he won't let anyone near." "Skulking," Miss Marple repeated, her tone encouraging Miss Hartnell to elaborate. "Oh yes. Last month, Gibbs caught him digging near the old mill at dusks. Said it looked like he was hiding something. And with that necklace gone missing from the manor, folk are wondering if Tom's got sticky fingers. Wouldn't be surprised, myself. He's got that look about him, like he's always watching his back." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, a gesture so subtle it might have been mistaken for a reaction to the tea Miss Hartnell had poured for her. In truth, she was piecing together a mental map of the manor's inhabitants and their possible motives. Tom Finch's secretive behavior was intriguing, but so was Clara's clandestine trips to Danbury, and Roger's debts. Well, they were a classic motive for mischief, as she had seen in many a village drama. "Thank you, Miss Hartnell," Miss Marple said, rising from the stool. "You've been most helpful. I mustn't keep you from your work." "Oh, it's no trouble at all," Miss Hartnell replied, clearly reluctant to end the conversation. "Do give my regards to Lady Harrow. And mind you, watch out for that ghost." Miss Marple smiled and stepped back into the morning light, her mind already turning to her next destination, the village shop, where Mrs. Bantry, another font of local knowledge, was likely to be found. The shop was a short walk across the green, its windows displaying an array of goods from jars of homemade jam to skeins of wool. Mrs. Bantry, a stout woman with a cheerful demeanor and a sharp tongue, was behind the counter, arranging a display of tinned biscuits. Miss Marple, Mrs. Bantry exclaimed, her face lighting up. Come to stock up on provisions, or is this a social call? A bit of both, Miss Marple replied, her eyes twinkling. I'm staying at Moonrise Manor, and I thought I'd see how the village is faring. There's been quite a stir about that echo, hasn't there? Mrs. Bantry chuckled, wiping her hands on her apron. Stirs, putting it mildly. Half the village thinks it's a ghost, the other half thinks it's someone playing tricks. My money is on the latter. You don't get to my age without knowing people are more likely to cause trouble than spirits. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of agreement. Quite so. Have you noticed anything unusual about the manor's residents? I understand. They're a varied bunch. Mrs. Bantry leaned closer, her voice dropping. Varied's one way to put it. That Dr. Marsh, the cousin always poking about with her books and her stories about curses. She was in here last week, buying candles and muttering about rituals to appease Lady Eleanor. Load of nonsense, if you ask me, but she's got the village half believing her. And then there's Mrs. Grimes, the housekeeper. Proper sorpus, that one. She was in here yesterday, snapping at poor Jenny for dropping a bag of flour. Said she's got enough to deal with at the manor without village idiots making her life harder. Miss Marple's eyebrows rose slightly. Mrs. Grimes does seem rather tense, and the others. Well, Roger Harrow's a charmer, but he's got no sense with money. I heard he tried to sell a painting to Mr. Ellison at the antique shop, but it was a fake, poorly done, too. And Clara Weston, she's a mystery. Comes in here sometimes, buys nothing but a packet of tea, and looks like she's expecting the roof to fall in. I saw her last week, hurrying to catch the Danbury bus. Looked like she didn't want to be seen. Miss Marple filed this away, noting the consistency with Miss Hartnell's account of Clara's trips. And Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, I hear he's a bit of an enigma. Mrs. Bantry snorted. Enigma's generous. He's a shifty one, mark my words. Always lurking about, never says more than 2 words. I saw him once, carrying a sack into the woods behind the manor. Looked heavy, too. I told my husband, Colonel Bantry, there's something not right about that man. Miss Marple thanked Mrs. Bantry and purchased a small tin of biscuits, more out of politeness than necessity. As she stepped back onto the green, she paused to consider her findings. The village gossip painted a picture of a household rife with secrets, Roger's debts, Clara's mysterious errands, Tom's suspicious activities, Mrs. Grimes's irritability, and Dr. Marsh's obsession with the curse. The echo, Miss Marple suspected, was no supernatural phenomenon but a deliberate act, perhaps to distract from the theft of the necklace or some other misdeed. Her next stop was the vicarage, where the Reverend Clement, a kindly man with a penchant for local history, might offer a different perspective. The vicarage was a quaint, ivy-covered building beside the church, its garden bursting with late-blooming roses. The Reverend welcomed her warmly, ushering her into his study, where books and papers were stacked precariously on every surface. Miss Marple, what a pleasure, he said, offering her a chair. I trust you're enjoying your stay at Moonrise Manor, despite the disturbances." Miss Marple smiled. "It's certainly an interesting visit. I was hoping you might shed light on the manor's history, particularly this talk of a curse." The Reverend's eyes lit up, and he launched into a detailed account of Lady Eleanor's tragic tale, much as Dr. Marsh had done. But he added a detail that caught Miss Marple's attention. The manor's bell tower, long disused, was said to have been a favorite haunt of Lady Eleanor, who would climb it to gaze at the moor. "Some say her spirit lingers there," he concluded, "though I suspect the echo is more likely the work of the wind or human hands." Miss Marple's interest sharpened. The bell tower, which she had already noted for its acoustic properties, seemed increasingly central to the mystery. She thanked the Reverend and made her way back toward the manor, stopping briefly at the village pub, the Blue Boar, to gauge the mood among the locals. The pub was quiet, with only a few farmers nursing pints. The landlord, Mr. Gibbs, confirmed Miss Hartnell's story about Tom Finch's nocturnal activities, and added that he'd seen Clara Weston at the Danbury station, looking furtive as a fox. As Miss Marple walked back to Moonrise Manor, the sun climbing higher in the sky, she reflected on the morning's gleanings. The village gossip had provided a wealth of leads, but no clear answers. Clara's trips to Danbury suggested a connection to the missing necklace, perhaps an attempt to sell it or meet an accomplice. Tom Finch's secretive behavior pointed to possible involvement in the theft or something else entirely. Mrs. Grimes's defensiveness and Dr. Marsh's fixation on the curse hinted at deeper motives, and Roger, with his debts, remained a classic suspect. The echo, Miss Marple was increasingly certain, was a man-made distraction, designed to keep the household in. Perhaps the village focused on ghostly fears rather than earthly crimes. The bell tower, with its potential to amplify sound, was a likely source, and she resolved to inspect it further. But for now, she would return to the manor and observe the household, letting their actions and reactions guide her next steps. As she approached the manor's gates, the moor stretched out before her, vast and silent under the midday sun. The echo was absent now, but Miss Marple knew it would return at moonrise, carrying with it the secrets of Moonrise Manor, and she, with her quiet persistence and keen understanding of human nature, was determined to uncover them. Chapter 6. A Clue in the Bell Tower. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Moonrise Manor, casting long dappled shadows across the oak-paneled dining room. Miss Jane Marple sat at the breakfast table, her delicate hands folded neatly over her napkin, her eyes quietly observing the household as they gathered. The air was thick with unspoken tension, the eerie echo from the previous night still lingering in their minds like a persistent fog. Beatrice Harrow, seated at the head of the table, sipped her tea with a strained smile, her composure a fragile veneer over her unease. Roger Harrow, her nephew, slouched in his chair, his artist's fingers drumming restlessly on the tablecloth, while Clara Weston, his fiancée, sat pale and silent, her eyes darting nervously toward the windows. Mrs. Grimes, the stern housekeeper, bustled in with a fresh pot of tea, her lips pursed in disapproval, though whether at the guests or the situation, Miss Marple could not yet discern. Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, was conspicuously absent, likely tending to the estate's sprawling grounds, and Dr. Evelyn Marsh, the folklorist, sat with a notebook open before her, scribbling furiously as if the morning's banalities held some profound secret. Miss Marple's thoughts, however, were not on the breakfast spread of scones and marmalade, but on the peculiar sound that had woken the household at midnight. The wailing echo, so perfectly timed with the moonrise, had struck her as oddly theatrical, too precise to be a natural phenomenon or the work of a restless spirit. Her visit to St. Mary Mead's village the previous day had yielded useful gossip. Miss Hartnell's tales of Tom Finch's dubious past and Clara's secretive trips to town had set her mind worry, but it was the manor itself that now called for her attention. The bell tower, mentioned in passing by Beatrice as a relic of the estate's medieval origins, had piqued her curiosity. Its position at the edge of the manor's grounds, overlooking the moor, made it a likely candidate for amplifying sounds across the vast, empty landscape. She resolved to inspect it that morning, her knitting bag slung over her arm as a convenient excuse for her wanderings. "Beatrice, dear," Miss Marple said, her voice soft but deliberate, "I thought I might take a stroll about the grounds. After breakfast, the air here is so bracing, and I've a fancy to see that old bell tower you mentioned. Such a charming feature for an estate like this." Lady Beatrice looked up, her teacup pausing midway to her lips. "The bell tower. Oh, it's dreadfully neglected," Jane half-ruined. "Really, the stairs are steep, and I shouldn't think it safe for you to go poking about." "Nonsense," Miss Marple replied with a gentle smile, her eyes twinkling with a determination that belied her frail appearance. "I'm quite spry for my age, and I do love a bit of history. Perhaps Tom could show me the way. I'd hate to get lost." At the mention of Tom, Mrs. Grimes gave a sharp sniff, setting the teapot down with a clatter. "That man's always off somewhere when he's needed," she muttered, her tone laced with disdain. "Likely digging up trouble instead of weeds." Roger chuckled, though the sound was hollow. "Tom's harmless, Mrs. Grimes, just likes his own company. I'll take you, Miss Marple, if you're set on it." Clara's head snapped up, her fingers tightening around her spoon. "Roger, you've got your painting to finish. Let Mrs. Grimes go with her, or perhaps Dr. Marsh. She knows all about the manor's history." Dr. Marsh looked up from her notebook, her sharp eyes narrowing slightly. "I'd be delighted, Miss Marple, but I've some research to attend to this morning. The tower's not much to see, just crumbling stone and cobwebs. Hardly worth your time." Miss Marple noted the quick exchange of glances around the table, Clara's anxious fidgeting, Roger's forced nonchalance, Mrs. Grimes's barely concealed irritation, and Dr. Marsh's sudden eagerness to divert her. It was a tableau of unease, and she tucked it away in her mind, as she often did, like a skein of wool to be unraveled later. "No trouble at all," she said brightly. "I'll manage on my own. A little exploration never hurt anyone." After breakfast, Miss Marple donned her sensible walking shoes and a light shawl, her knitting bag swinging gently at her side. The manor's grounds were vast, the lawn giving way to a wilder expanse of gorse and heather that stretched toward the moor. The bell tower stood at the far edge of the property, a squat, weathered structure of gray stone, its conical roof sagging under the weight of years. Ivy clung to its walls, and the narrow windows were dark with grime. As she approached, she noticed the door at its base was slightly ajar, the rusted hinges creaking in the breeze. She glanced back toward the manor, ensuring she was unobserved, and slipped inside. The interior was dim, the air heavy with the scent of damp stone and decay. A spiral staircase wound upward, its steps worn smooth by centuries of use. Miss Marple climbed carefully, her hand steadying herself against the rough wall. At the top, she found a small, circular chamber, its floor littered with dust and broken bits of plaster. The bell itself was long gone, but a rickety wooden platform remained, offering a view of the moor through the narrow windows. She stood for a moment, listening. The wind whistled faintly through the gaps in the stone, but it was not the wailing echo she had heard the night before. Her eyes scanned the room, sharp and methodical, despite her unassuming demeanor. In a shadowed corner, half hidden behind a pile of rotting beams, she spotted something out of place, a glint of metal, unnatural in the organic decay of the tower. Kneeling with surprising agility, she brushed away the dust to reveal an old phonograph, its horn tarnished but intact. Beside it lay a scratched gramophone record, its label faded but still legible, Wailing Winds, recorded 1898. She turned the record over in her hands, her lips pursing thoughtfully. The phonograph's needle was worn, and a faint scratch mark suggested it had been used recently. Someone, it seemed, had gone to great lengths to create the ghostly echo that had so unnerved the household. Miss Marple straightened, her mind racing. The phonograph was an ingenious device for simulating a supernatural sound, but it raised more questions than it answered. Who had placed it here, and why? Was it meant to frighten the household, to distract from the theft of the emerald necklace, or to serve some deeper purpose? She recalled Dr. Marsh's obsession with the manor's curse, Roger's financial troubles, Clara's secretive behavior, and Tom Finch's dubious reputation. Even Mrs. Grimes, with her sharp tongue and watchful eyes, seemed to guard secrets of her own. The phonograph was a clue, but it was not the whole story. She decided to keep her discovery to herself for now, replacing the phonograph and record exactly as she had found them. Whoever was behind the echo would likely return to check their handiwork, and she had no intention of alerting them to her suspicions. As she descended the stairs, she heard footsteps outside and quickly stepped into the shadow of the doorway. Peering through the crack, she saw Mrs. Grimes striding purposefully across the lawn, her black dress stark against the green. The housekeeper paused, glancing toward the tower with a frown, then continued toward the manor. Miss Marple waited until she was out of sight before emerging, her expression serene but her mind alert. Back at the manor, the household was in a state of subdued agitation. Roger was in the drawing room, sketching furiously, his charcoal smudging the paper as he muttered about needing inspiration. Clara sat by the window, twisting a handkerchief in her hands, her eyes red-rimmed as if she had been crying. Dr. Marsh was in the library, surrounded by piles of books on folklore, her pen scratching as she cross-referenced some obscure text. Beatrice, meanwhile, was in her sitting room, writing letters to distant relatives, her face pale but composed. Miss Marple joined her, settling into a chintz armchair with her knitting. "Beatrice," she said casually, her needles clicking, "that bell tower is quite a curiosity. Do you ever use it for anything? Storage, perhaps, or other purposes?" Beatrice looked up, surprised. "The tower? Heavens, no. It's been abandoned for years. I don't think anyone's been up there since the last groundskeeper tried to patch the roof a decade ago." "Why do you ask?" "Oh, just idle curiosity," Miss Marple replied, her tone light. "It's such a striking feature, and I wondered if it might have some practical use. perhaps for signaling or amplifying sounds. Beatrice frowned, setting down her pen. Amplifying sounds. Jane, you don't think that dreadful echo has something to do with the tower, do you? Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. I'm sure it's nothing of the sort. Just an old lady's fancy. But I did notice the door was ajar. Perhaps someone's been poking about. Beatrice's expression tightened. That's odd. I'll have Tom check the lock. We can't have strangers wandering in. Miss Marple nodded, her needles never pausing. She had planted a seed, and she was content to let it grow. The household's reactions to her interest in the tower would tell her more than any direct question. She spent the rest of the morning observing, slipping into conversations with the ease of a practiced village gossip. Roger, when asked about the tower, laughed it off, saying it was just a crumbling old relic. Clara, however, grew visibly anxious, stammering that she never went near it because it was too spooky. Dr. Marsh, when Miss Marple mentioned the tower's acoustics, launched into a lecture about medieval architecture, her enthusiasm seeming just a shade to forced Mrs. Grimes. Meanwhile, was tight-lipped, insisting she had no time to bother with that moldy old pile. By lunchtime, Miss Marple had gathered enough to confirm her suspicions. The phonograph was no accident, and someone in the household was orchestrating the ghostly echo. The question was why. Was it to frighten Beatrice into selling the manor, as Roger might benefit from the funds? Was it to cover the theft of the necklace, as Clara's secretive behavior suggested? Or was it, as Miss Marple increasingly suspected, tied to Dr. Marsh's academic ambitions, her obsession with the curse perhaps driving her to fabricate evidence? Even Tom Finch, with his shadowy past, could not be ruled out, nor could Mrs. Grimes, whose defensiveness about the tower was telling. The afternoon brought a new development. As Miss Marple sat in the garden, pretending to read a novel while watching the manor's comings and goings, she saw Tom Finch emerge from the direction of the tower, a spade in hand. He glanced around furtively before heading toward the stables. Miss Marple made a mental note to investigate the grounds near the tower later, suspecting he might have buried something or was planning to. For now, she returned to the manor, joining the household for tea. The conversation was strained, with Clara excusing herself early and Roger snapping at Mrs. Grimes over a trivial matter. Dr. Marsh, however, was unusually talkative, regaling the group with tales of ghostly folklore, her eyes flicking toward Miss Marple as if gauging her reaction. As evening approached, Miss Marple retired to her room, ostensibly to rest, but in truth to review her findings. She sat at the small writing desk, her knitting abandoned for a moment as she jotted notes in her neat, precise handwriting. The phonograph was the key, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. The echo's timing, always at moonrise, suggested a deliberate schedule, perhaps to maximize its effect on the household's nerves. The theft of the necklace, the rumors of the curse, and the tensions among the household all pointed to a carefully staged deception, but whose hand was guiding it, and to what end? She was interrupted by a knock at the door. Mrs. Grimes stood there, her face pale and her hands clasped tightly. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice low, "I need to speak with you. It's about the tower. I saw something there this afternoon, and I don't know what to make of it." Miss Marple gestured for her to sit, her expression calm but her mind racing. "Do tell, Mrs. Grimes. I'm all ears." The housekeeper hesitated, then leaned forward, her voice barely above a whisper. "I was checking the grounds, like Lady Beatrice asked, and I saw Dr. Marsh near the tower. She was carrying something a box, I think, and she looked furtive. I didn't want to say anything in front of the others, but with all this talk of ghosts and curses, I'm worried she's up to no good." Miss Marple nodded, her face betraying nothing. "Thank you, Mrs. Grimes. That's most helpful. I'll keep it in mind." As the housekeeper left, Miss Marple leaned back, her fingers steepled thoughtfully. Dr. Marsh's behavior was increasingly suspicious, but Mrs. Grimes's sudden candor was equally intriguing. Was she genuinely concerned? Or was she deflecting attention from herself? The tower, it seemed, held more secrets than just the phonograph, and Miss Marple was determined to uncover them all. That night, as the household gathered for dinner, the atmosphere was electric with unease. The echo sounded again, its wail carrying across the moor, and Clara let out a small cry, clutching Roger's arm. Miss Marple watched closely, noting Dr. Marsh's quick glance toward the window, Roger's forced laugh, and Mrs. Grimes's tight-lipped silence. The phonograph, she knew, was still in place, and someone had activated it. She resolved to return to the tower at first light, hoping to catch the culprit in the actor, at least to find more evidence to unravel the mystery of Moonrise Manor. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, but Miss Marple lay awake, her mind turning over the clues like a well-worn quilt. The phonograph, the necklace, the curse, the household's tangled motives, all were threads in a pattern she was beginning to discern. Tomorrow she would take the next step, and she had no doubt that the truth, like the moonrise itself, would soon come to light. Chapter 7. The Heirloom's Trail. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Moonrise Manor, casting a golden haze across the breakfast room. The air was thick with the scent of freshly brewed tea and warm scones, but an undercurrent of unease lingered among the household. Miss Jane Marple sat at the polished mahogany table, her delicate hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes quietly observing the others. Lady Beatrice Harrow, at the head of the table, looked weary, her usual poise frayed by the unsettling events of the past few days. The eerie echo that had haunted the manor at Moonrise, the whispers of a family curse, and the theft of the priceless emerald necklace had woven a tapestry of suspicion that seemed to tighten with each passing hour. Roger Harrow, Beatrice's nephew, slouched in his chair, his artist's fingers drumming restlessly on the tablecloth. His dark hair was slightly disheveled, and his eyes darted nervously toward his fiancée, Clara Weston, who sat opposite him. Clara, pale and fragile-looking in her lavender morning dress, kept her gaze fixed on her untouched plate, her fingers twisting the edge of her napkin. Mrs. Grimes, the stern housekeeper, moved silently around the room, her sharp eyes missing nothing as she refilled teacups with mechanical precision. Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, was absent, likely tending to the sprawling grounds of the estate, though his absence only deepened the air of mistrust. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, Beatrice's distant cousin and a folklorist with an unsettling obsession with the manor's history, sat at the far end of the table, her notebook open, scribbling furiously as though the breakfast conversation held secrets of academic import. Miss Marple sipped her tea, her expression serene but her mind sharp. The theft of the emerald necklace, a family heirloom tied to the legend of Lady Eleanor's curse, had stirred more than just ghostly rumors. It had exposed fault lines in the household, revealing motives and secrets that Miss Marple was determined to unravel. She had already begun to suspect that the echo, supposedly the wail of Lady Eleanor's ghost, was no supernatural phenomenon but a carefully orchestrated deception. Her discovery of the phonograph in the bell tower had confirmed her suspicions, though she had kept that knowledge to herself for now, waiting for the right moment to act. But the necklace, she sensed, was the key to understanding the deeper truth behind the manor's troubles. Beatrice broke the silence, her voice steady but tinged with strain. "Jane, I've been thinking about the necklace. It's not just the loss of it, though heaven knows it's valuable, but the way it's stirred up all this talk of curses. I can't help but feel it's all connected." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes soft but alert. "I quite agree, Beatrice. The theft of such an heirloom is rarely a simple matter of greed. It often carries a weight of intentions, someone wanting to send a message, perhaps, or to cover something else entirely." Roger shifted uncomfortably, his fork clattering against his plate. "Aunt Beatrice, I've told you, I had nothing to do with it. I know I'm the beneficiary of the insurance, but I wouldn't dream of stealing from you. I'm an artist, not a thief." Clara reached for his hand, her touch fleeting but protective. "Roger's right. He's been nothing but devoted to you, Lady Beatrice. He'd never do such a thing." Miss Marple's gaze flickered. The young heiress was nervous, and not just about the echo or the curse. There was something guarded in her manner, a hesitation that suggested she knew more than she was letting on. Miss Marple filed the observation away, her mind turning to the information she had gathered from the village the previous day. Miss Hartnell, the postmistress of St. Mary Mead, had been a font of local gossip, as always. Over a cup of tea at the post office, she had mentioned Clara's frequent trips to a nearby town, supposedly to visit a dressmaker, though Miss Hartnell had her doubts. "A dressmaker, my foot," she had said, with a knowing sniff. "She's been seen coming out of Mr. Pennington's shop, and he's no dressmaker, he's a jeweler, shifty sort, too, if you ask me." Miss Marple had pressed gently, learning that Mr. Pennington was known for appraising and occasionally purchasing valuable items, often under the table. The connection was intriguing. Could Clara be involved in the necklace's disappearance? And if so, why? Now, at the breakfast table, Miss Marple decided to test the waters. "Beatrice," she said mildly, "you mentioned the necklace was insured. I suppose the insurance company would require a thorough investigation before paying out. Have they sent anyone yet?" Beatrice sighed, setting down her teacup. "Not yet, but they've been notified. The policy was quite substantial enough to cover the necklace's value and then some. Roger, as my closest heir, would benefit if the claim is approved, but I can't imagine." Her voice trailed off, and she glanced at her nephew, her expression conflicted. Roger's face reddened. "I don't need the money that badly, Aunt Beatrice. Yes, I've had some debts. Painting supplies aren't cheap, and galleries don't always pay on time, but I'd never resort to theft. You know that." Dr. Marsh looked up from her notebook, her eyes gleaming with interest. "It's fascinating, isn't it? The necklace isn't just a piece of jewelry, it's a symbol of the Harrow family's legacy. Its theft could be seen as an attack on that legacy, perhaps even tied to the curse. Lady Eleanor's betrayal, after all, was about more than just her murder. It was about trust broken within the family." Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. Dr. Marsh's obsession with the curse was becoming predictable, but there was something calculated in her tone, as though she were steering the conversation toward her own ends. An interesting perspective, Dr. Marsh, Miss Marple said. But I wonder if the theft might be more practical in nature. Jewels, after all, are often stolen for their monetary value, not their symbolic weight. Mrs. Grimes, who had been hovering near the sideboard, spoke up, her voice sharp. If you ask me, it's that Tom Finch. He's always poking around the grounds, acting like he owns the place. Wouldn't surprise me if he slipped into the house and took it. He's got those sneaky eyes. Roger snorted. Mrs. Grimes, you've never liked Tom. Just because he keeps to himself doesn't mean he's a thief. Besides, he's been loyal to Aunt Beatrice for years. Loyalty can be bought, Mrs. Grimes retorted, her lips pursing. And he's not as simple as he pretends. I've seen him reading books, fancy ones, too, not the sort a groundskeeper ought to have. Miss Marple tilted her head, intrigued. Mrs. Grimes's hostility toward Tom was worth noting. Ass was her mention of his reading habits. It suggested Tom might be more educated or more cunning than he let on. But her accusation felt too convenient, almost as if she were trying to deflect attention. Miss Marple made a mental note to speak with Tom later, preferably away from the housekeeper's watchful gaze. Clara, meanwhile, had gone even paler, her hands trembling as she reached for her teacup. Can we not talk about this? She said softly. It's bad enough hearing that awful echo every night. I don't think I can stand much more of this. Beatrice reached over to pat her hand. My dear, you mustn't let it upset you. So, Jane is here to help us sort it all out. She has a way of seeing things clearly. Miss Marple smiled modestly. I'm only an old woman who notices things, Beatrice. But I do think it's worth looking into Clara's visits to town. You mentioned seeing a jeweler, my dear. Was that for an appraisal of your own jewelry, perhaps? Clara froze, her teacup halfway to her lips. The room fell silent, all eyes turning to her. Roger frowned, his hand tightening around his fork. Clara, what's this about a jeweler? Clara set her cup down with a clatter, her cheeks flushing. It was nothing important. I had some old pieces I thought might be worth something. Roger's been struggling with his debts, and I wanted to help. That's all. Miss Marple's eyes softened, but her mind was racing. Clara's explanation was plausible, but the speed with which she delivered it and the way her eyes avoided Roger's suggested there was more to the story. Was she protecting Roger, or hiding her own involvement? And if she had been to see Mr. Pennington, had she brought the emerald necklace with her? The possibility was tantalizing, but Miss Marple knew better than to jump to conclusions. She would need to visit the jeweler herself to confirm Clara's story. Beatrice, sensing the tension, changed the subject. Jane, I was thinking we might take a walk in the gardens this afternoon. The fresh air might do us all good, and you could see the grounds for yourself. Perhaps you'll spot something we've missed. A splendid idea, Miss Marple replied. I'd also like to have a word with Tom Finch, if he's about Tom. I understand he knows the estate better than anyone. Mrs. Grimes sniffed, but said nothing, busying herself with clearing plates. Dr. Marsh closed her notebook with a snap, her expression unreadable. Roger and Clara exchanged a glance, and Miss Marple noted the unspoken communication between them. There was a web of secrets in this house, and she was determined to untangle it. After breakfast, Miss Marple excused herself to her room, ostensibly to rest, but in truth to organize her thoughts. She sat at the small writing desk, her knitting needles clicking softly as she reflected on the morning's conversation. The necklace's theft was the linchpin, she was certain. Its value was undeniable. Of that size and quality were rare, and the insurance payout would be substantial. But who stood to gain the most? Roger, as the beneficiary, was the obvious suspect. But his denials seemed genuine, and his devotion to Beatrice was evident. Clara's secretive behavior, however, was troubling. If she had been to see a jeweler, was it truly to sell her own jewelry, or was she acting as a go-between for someone else? And then there was Dr. Marsh, whose academic zeal seemed to border on fanaticism. Could her interest in the curse be a cover for something more sinister? Miss Marple's thoughts drifted to the phonograph in the bell tower. The scratched record and the hidden mechanism suggested a deliberate attempt to frighten the household, perhaps to distract from the theft. But who had the knowledge and the access to set it up? Mrs. Grimes, with her keys to every room in the manor, was a possibility, though her defensiveness about the tower suggested she might know more than she was letting on. Tom Finch, too, was a mystery. His solitary nature and rumored past made him a convenient scapegoat, but Miss Marple had learned long ago not to trust convenient answers. She set her knitting aside and reached for her notebook, jotting down a few key points: Clara's visits to the jeweler, Roger's debts, Dr. Marsh's curse, obsession, Mrs. Grimes's hostility toward Tom, the phonograph. Each was a thread in the tapestry, and she was beginning to see how they might connect. But she needed more information, and the village was her next stop that afternoon. Miss Marple donned her hat and coat and made her way to St. Mary Mead's High Street, her steps light but purposeful. The village was bustling with its usual quiet energy: children playing near the green, shopkeepers chatting with customers, and the ever-present hum of gossip. Miss Marple stopped at the post office, where Miss Hartnell was sorting letters behind the counter. "Good afternoon, Miss Hartnell," Miss Marple said, her smile warm. "I was hoping you might have a moment to chat. I'm curious about that jeweler Clara Weston's been visiting. Mr. Pennington, I believe." Miss Hartnell's eyes lit up, delighted to share her knowledge. "Oh yes, Mr. Pennington, a slippery character, if you ask me. He's got a shop in Danbury, just a short train ride from here. Says he's an appraiser, but I've heard he deals in things that aren't always above board. Clara's been seen there more than once, always looking nervous. And she's not the only one from Moonrise Manor who's been to Danbury. That Dr. Marsh was there last month, supposedly looking for old books, but I wouldn't be surprised if she was up to something else." Miss Marple raised an eyebrow. "Dr. Marsh, you say? How interesting. And what about Tom Finch? I understand he's a bit of a mystery." Miss Hartnell leaned closer, lowering her voice. "Tom's a queer one. Keeps to himself, but he's not as simple as he seems. I heard he used to work in London, something to do with antiques, before he came here. Lost his job under a cloud, they say. Never married, no family to speak of. But he's loyal to Lady Beatrice, I'll give him that." Miss Marple thanked her and left the post office, her mind buzzing. Dr. Marsh's visit to Danbury was an unexpected twist. Was she truly searching for books, or was she, like Clara, connected to the jeweler? and Tom's past in antiques suggested he might have the knowledge to recognize the necklace's value and the means to dispose of it. The threads were multiplying, but Miss Marple felt she was getting closer to the heart of the mystery. Back at Moonrise Manor, she found Tom Finch in the gardens, pruning a rosebush with meticulous care. He was a wiry man in his 50s, with weathered hands and a guarded expression. Miss Marple approached him with her usual disarming charm, commenting on the beauty of the roses before steering the conversation to the manor. "You must know every inch of this estate, Mr. Finch," she said. "It's such a large place, with so many secrets. Have you ever noticed anything unusual near the bell tower?" Tom's hands paused, and he glanced at her, his eyes narrowing slightly. "The bell tower. Not much to see there, miss. Just an old relic, falling apart. I keep the grounds clear, but I don't go poking around where I'm not needed." "Of course," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle. "But you must hear the echo at night. It's quite unsettling, isn't it?" Tom shrugged, returning to his pruning. "Just the wind, most likely. Old houses make all sorts of noises. I don't pay it much mind." Miss Marple smiled, sensing his reluctance to engage. Tom was cautious, but not hostile. He was hiding something, perhaps, but she didn't think he was the mastermind behind the echo or the theft. His loyalty to Beatrice seemed genuine, and his solitary nature suggested he was more likely a witness than a culprit. Still, she would keep an eye on him. As evening approached, Miss Marple joined Beatrice for tea in the drawing room. The conversation turned to the necklace, and Beatrice shared more details about its history. "It was Lady Eleanor's pride and joy," she said, her voice tinged with nostalgia. "A gift from her husband before everything went wrong. It's been passed down through the family, always to the eldest daughter, or, in my case, the last surviving heir. I never thought it would be stolen under my roof." Miss Marple listened, her mind turning over the possibilities. The necklace's sentimental value made its theft all the more personal, but its monetary value was what drove the crime, she was sure. Someone in the household, or perhaps someone outside it, had seen an opportunity and seized it. The echo, with its ghostly connotations, was a clever distraction, designed to keep everyone focused on the curse rather than the crime. As the moon rose over the moor, the echo sounded again, its mournful wail echoing through the manor. Clara, who had joined them for tea, gasped and clutched Beatrice's hand. Roger stormed to the window, peering out into the darkness. "This has to stop," he muttered. "It's driving us all mad." Miss Marple remained calm, her eyes scanning the room. Mrs. Grimes, standing in the doorway, looked grim. Dr. Marsh, seated by the fire, scribbled in her notebook, her expression one of detached fascination. Tom Finch was nowhere to be seen, likely still in the gardens. The echo, Miss Marple knew, was no ghost. It was a tool wielded by someone with a purpose, and she was determined to find out who and why. The rest of the evening passed uneventfully, but Miss Marple's mind was far from idle. She retired to her room, her knitting needles clicking as she reviewed the day's discoveries. Clara's visits to the jeweler, Dr. Marsh's trip to Danbury, Tom's guarded demeanor, Mrs. Grimes's accusations, and the phonograph in the bell tower, all were pieces of a puzzle that was slowly taking shape. The necklace's trail was leading her somewhere, and she felt certain that the next few days would bring the truth to light. as she drifted off to sleep. The echo sounded once more, fainter now, as though its creator were growing careless. Miss Marple smiled to herself. Carelessness, she knew, was the downfall of even the cleverest criminals, and she was ready to catch them when they slipped. Chapter 8. Tensions rise. The dining room at Moonrise Manor was a cavernous space, its high ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork that had begun to crack with age. Mahogany table. The chandelier above cast a warm, golden glow, but its light did little to dispel the chill that had settled over the group. The eerie echo from the moor had sounded again just moments before they sat down to dinner, its mournful wail cutting through the twilight and leaving everyone on edge. Miss Jane Marple, seated near the head of the table beside Lady Beatrice Harrow, observed the scene with her usual quiet attentiveness, her knitting needles clicking softly in her lap as she took in every glance, every gesture, every word spoken and those left unsaid. Lady Beatrice, regal despite the strain evident in her lined face, attempted to steer the conversation toward neutral ground. "The pheasant is quite excellent tonight, Mrs. Grimes," she said, her voice carrying a forced cheer. "You've outdone yourself with the sauce." Mrs. Grimes, standing near the sideboard with her hands clasped tightly before her, gave a curt nod. "Thank you, my lady. The cook followed my instructions precisely." Her tone was clipped, her eyes darting toward the other guests as if she expected one of them to leap up and accuse her of something untoward. Ms. Marple noted the housekeeper's defensiveness, filing it away alongside the other peculiarities she had observed since her arrival at the manor. Roger Harrow, strained smile. "Aunt Beatrice, you're too kind. But I dare say the atmosphere tonight is rather less appetizing than the pheasant. That wretched echo does it ever stop?" His tone was light, but his fingers tightened around the stem of his glass, betraying his unease. Clara Weston, Roger's fiancée, sat beside him, her delicate hands fidgeting with the napkin in her lap. Her face was pale, her eyes wide and glassy, as if she expected the ghost of Lady Eleanor herself to materialize at any moment. "It's not natural," she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. "It's as if something is watching us, waiting." She shivered, pulling her shawl tighter around her shoulders. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, seated across from Clara, leaned forward. "What I've been saying, Clara, the echo is tied to the curse. It's a warning, a manifestation of the manor's troubled history. Lady Eleanor's spirit is restless, and we'd do well to heed it." Miss Marple's needles paused for a fraction of a second, her lips pursing slightly. Dr. Marsh's fervor for the supernatural was, in her view, a touch too enthusiastic. It was the sort of enthusiasm that could mask a different motive altogether. She resumed her knitting, her eyes flicking toward Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, who sat at the far end of the table, his weathered hands folded and his expression unreadable. His gaze lingered on Roger, nor the faint scowl that crossed his face when Dr. Marsh mentioned the curse. "Enough of this ghost nonsense. A trick, probably you, Tom, skulking about the moor with some contraption to scare us all." His tone was half joking, but there was an edge to it, a challenge. Tom's head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. "Watch your tongue, Harrow. I've no time for games, unlike some who'd rather paint pretty pictures than pay their debts." His voice was low, almost a growl, and the room fell silent, the weight of his words hanging in the air. Beatrice's fork clattered against her plate. "Gentlemen, please," she said sharply. "This is hardly the time for accusations. We're all unsettled by the echo, but turning on each other won't solve anything." Miss Marple tilted her head slightly, her mild expression belying the keen interest with which she absorbed the exchange. Roger's debts were no secret. Beatrice had mentioned them in passing, and the village gossip had confirmed it, but Tom's pointed remark suggested a deeper resentment. And Tom himself, with his secretive past and access to the manor's grounds, was not above suspicion. She made a mental note to ask Sir Henry Clithering when he arrived, to look into Tom's history more thoroughly. Clara, her voice trembling, broke the silence. "It's not just the echo. It's the necklace, too. Eleanor's emerald's gone, and now this haunting. It's all connected. I know it is." Her eyes darted to Roger, then away, as if she feared he might contradict her. Dr. Marsh leaned back in her chair, her lips curling into a faint, almost smug smile. "Exactly, Clara. The theft of the necklace has stirred something in this house. The curse is real, and ignoring it won't make it go away." Mrs. Grimes, who had been silent, stepped forward, her face tight with irritation. "If you'll pardon me, Dr. Marsh, I'd say it's not ghosts stealing jewels. It's someone in this house, and I've half a mind to lock every door and window tonight to keep what's left safe." Her gaze swept the table, a soothing counterpoint to the rising tension. Mrs. Grimes's defensiveness was curious, as was her quickness to point fingers. The housekeeper had been unusually protective of the bell tower when Miss Marple had mentioned it earlier that day, and now she seemed eager to shift suspicion onto others. Had discovered in the tower, then she let on. Beatrice, clearly desperate to restore order, clapped her hands lightly. "Let's not spoil the evening further, Mrs. Grimes. Please serve the dessert, and perhaps we can discuss something more pleasant. Miss Marple, you were telling me about your garden earlier. How are your roses faring?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling with the gentle amusement she reserved for such moments. "Oh, quite well, Lady Beatrice, though I dare say they require more attention than some of the mysteries in St. Mary Mead. Roses, unlike people." She paused, letting her words settle, and noticed Clara's hands tremble slightly as she reached for her water glass. The deserter-rich plum tart was served. Village fate, the restoration of the manor's west wing, but the reprieve was short-lived. As the last plates were cleared, the echo sounded again, a long, keening wail that seemed to rise from the very earth. Clara gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, and she swayed in her chair, began to slump forward. "Clara, darling, are you all right?" he asked, his voice laced with panic as he supported her. "She's fainted," Dr. Marsh said, rising quickly and moving to Clara's side. "It's the strain, no doubt. The echo, it's too much for her nerves." Miss Marple, setting her knitting aside, stood and approached with calm efficiency. "Roger, help her to the sofa." In the drawing-room, Mrs. Grimes, "Perhaps some smelling salts?" Mrs. Grimes nodded and hurried off, while Roger half-carried Clara out of the dining-room. The others followed, their faces a mix of concern and suspicion. Miss Marple lingered behind, her sharp eyes scanning the room. She noted that Tom Finch had slipped out quietly, his absence unnoticed by the others in the commotion. Dr. Marsh, meanwhile, hovered near Beatrice, murmuring something about the curse's psychological effects in the drawing-room. Clara was revived with the aid of Mrs. Grimes's smelling salts, her face still pale but her breathing steadier. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "It's just that sound. It's like it's calling me, warning me." "Nonsense," Roger said, though his own face was drawn. "It's just the wind, or some trick of the moor. Isn't that right, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple, seated in an armchair with her knitting resumed, gave a gentle nod. "The moor does have a way of playing tricks on the ears, Mr. Harrow, but I find it's often the simplest explanations that prove true." Her tone was mild, but her words carried a weight that made Roger shift uncomfortably. Beatrice, standing by the fireplace, clasped her hands together. "I think we've all had enough excitement for one evening. Perhaps it's best if we retire early. Miss Marple, you'll stay up with me for a bit, won't you? I'd appreciate your company." "Of course, Lady Beatrice," Miss Marple replied, her smile serene, but her mind was far from restful. The echo, the stolen necklace, the strained alibis, everything pointed to a carefully orchestrated deception. The question was not just who was behind it, but why. And as she glanced at the assembled company, Roger's forced bravado, Clara's trembling fear, Dr. Marsh's calculating gaze, Mrs. Grimes's tight-lipped silence, and Tom's conspicuous absence, she knew the answer lay in their motives, their secrets, and the subtle ways they betrayed themselves. As the household dispersed, Miss Marple remained by the fire with Beatrice, her knitting needles moving rhythmically. "It's a curious thing, Beatrice," she said after a moment, her voice low. "People often think they can hide their true selves, but they always leave clues. A glance, a word, a moment of hesitation, it's all there if you know where to look." Beatrice sighed, her shoulders sagging. "I don't know what to make of it, Jane. This house, this family, tearing itself apart." "It will, my dear," Miss Marple said softly. "It always does, when the truth comes out." The fire crackled, casting shadows on the walls, and outside, the moor was silent. No echo, no wail, just the vast, empty darkness. But Miss Marple knew the silence was temporary. The truth was close, and she would find it, as she always did, by watching, listening, and understanding the human heart. The following morning, the air at Moonrise Manor was thick with unease, his eyes scanning the moor as if expecting the ghostly figure he claimed to have seen. Dr. Marsh, ever the academic, had her nose buried in a Mrs. Grimes bustled about, her movements brisk but her face pale, as if she hadn't slept. Tom Finch was nowhere to be seen, which Miss Marple noted with interest. She excused herself early, citing a need to stretch her legs, and made her way to the bell tower once more. The phonograph she had discovered was still there, hidden behind a stack of old crates, its needle poised over the scratched record. The record was worn, but the scratches were deliberate, designed to produce the wailing sound that mimicked the ghostly echo. Whoever had set it up knew the manor well, knew its acoustics, its secrets, and the fear it could inspire. As she descended the tower's narrow stairs, she heard footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw Mrs. Grimes, her face a mask of barely concealed alarm. "Miss Marple, what are you doing up here?" the housekeeper demanded, her voice sharp. "Oh, just satisfying an old woman's curiosity," Miss Marple replied, her tone light. "This tower has such a fascinating view of the moor. Don't you think it's odd, Mrs. Grimes, how the echo seems to come from everywhere and nowhere at once?" Mrs. Grimes's lips tightened. "I wouldn't know, Miss. I've got enough to do without chasing ghosts." She turned abruptly and strode away, her footsteps echoing in the stone corridor. Miss Marple watched her go, her mind turning over the housekeeper's reaction. Mrs. Grimes was hiding something, perhaps not the theft itself, but knowledge of it or of the person responsible. And then there was Tom Finch, whose absence this morning was conspicuous. Had he been in the tower last night, setting the phonograph to play its eerie tune? Or was he, too, a victim of the same fear that gripped Clara? Returning to the manor, Miss Marple found Beatrice in the library, poring over old family records. "Jane, I've been thinking," Beatrice said, her voice low. "The necklace was insured, yes, but Roger is the beneficiary. Do you think, could he have taken it?" Miss Marple tilted her head, considering. "It's possible, Beatrice, but people are rarely so straightforward in their deceit. The echo, the ferrets, all part of a larger design. We must be patient and see who stumbles first." Beatrice nodded, though her expression remained troubled. "I just want my home to be at peace again." "It will be," Miss Marple assured her. "But first, we must let the guilty reveal themselves. They always do, in time." The rest of the day passed in a haze of suspicion and half-spoken accusations. Roger confronted Tom in the garden, demanding to know where he had been that morning. Tom, in turn, accused Dr. Marsh of spreading lies about the curse to distract from her own scheming. Clara, still shaken, kept to her room, claiming a headache, and Dr. Marsh, undeterred, continued her research, her eyes gleaming with a zeal that Miss Marple found increasingly suspicious. By evening, the household was on edge, each member watching the others with barely concealed distrust. Miss Marple, however, remained calm, her knitting a constant companion as she pieced together the puzzle. The echo was no ghost, it was a tool, a means to an end. The necklace was the key, but not in the way everyone assumed, and the truth. But this time, Miss Marple was ready. She had a plan, and before the night was over, she intended to set a trap that would unravel the mystery once and for all. Chapter 9. Tensions Rise. The dining room at Moonrise Manor was a study in contrasts. The heavy oak table gleamed under the chandelier's soft glow, casting intricate shadows on the walls adorned with portraits of Harrow ancestors, their stern gazes seeming to judge the gathered company. The air was thick with unease, as though the very walls held their breath, waiting for the next discordant note in the strange symphony that had enveloped the estate. Dinner had been served, a modest affair of roast pheasant, glazed carrots, and a rather overdone pudding, but the food sat largely untouched. The clink of cutlery, replaced by the sharp edge of voices raised in accusation. Miss Jane Marple sat at the far end of the table, her knitting needles clicking softly, a rhythmic counterpoint to the rising tension. Her eyes, bright and sharp behind her spectacles, darted from face to face, taking in every gesture, every fleeting expression. Lady Beatrice Harrow, at the head of the table, looked pale, her hands clasped tightly around a glass of untouched claret. Roger Harrow, her nephew, slouched in his chair, his artist's fingers drumming an impatient rhythm on the tablecloth. Clara Weston, his fiancée, sat beside him, her delicate frame trembling slightly, her eyes fixed on her plate as though it held the answers to the manor's mysteries. Mrs. Grimes, the stern housekeeper, stood by the sideboard, her lips pursed in disapproval. while Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, hovered near the door, his weathered face unreadable. Dr. Evelyn Marsh, the folklorist, sat opposite Miss Marple, her scholarly air tinged with a restless energy, her fingers tapping the stem of her wineglass. The eerie echo that had haunted Moonrise Manor for weeks sounded again, its mournful wail drifting through the open windows, carried on the cool night breeze. Clara gasped, her fork clattering to her plate. "It's her," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "Lady Eleanor. She's warning us." "Nonsense," Roger snapped, though his own voice trembled slightly. "It's just the wind, or some trick of the moor. You're letting Marsh's stories get to you." He shot a pointed glance at Dr. Marsh, who raised an eyebrow but said nothing. "Trick or not," Tom Finch interjected, his rough voice cutting through the room, "something's not right here. That sound's been stirring up trouble, and I'd wager it's no ghost." His eyes narrowed at Roger. "Maybe someone's got a reason to keep us all on edge." Roger's chair scraped back as he stood, his face flushing. "Are you accusing me, Finch? Because I've had about enough of your skulking about, poking into things that don't concern you. Enough." Lady Beatrice's voice, though frail, carried authority. "This bickering solves nothing. We're all on edge, and this noise doesn't help. Jane, what do you make of it?" She turned to Miss Marple, her eyes pleading. For clarity, Miss Marple set her knitting aside, her movements deliberate. "I find it curious," she said, her voice calm but carrying that quiet authority that made everyone pause. "The echo seems to come at the most opportune moments, doesn't it? Almost as if it's meant to distract us." She paused, letting her words settle. "I wonder what it is we're not supposed to notice." A heavy silence followed, broken only by the faint tick of the grandfather clock in the hall. Clara's hands twisted in her lap, and Dr. Marsh's fingers stilled on her glass. Mrs. Grimes cleared her throat, stepping forward. "If you're suggesting someone's playing tricks, Miss Marple, I'd say it's a cruel thing to do to her ladyship. This house has enough burdens without manufactured ghosts." "Quite," Miss Marple agreed, her tone mild, but her eyes sharp. "But cruelty often has a purpose, Mrs. Grimes. Perhaps someone benefits from our fear." The housekeeper stiffened, her lips thinning, but she said nothing. Tom Finch shifted uncomfortably, his gaze flickering toward the window, where the echo had faded. Roger sat back down, his anger simmering but contained, while Clara's eyes darted nervously between him and Miss Marple. Dr. Marsh leaned forward, her voice measured. "Miss Marple, you're suggesting a human hand behind this phenomenon. I've studied the legends of this manor for years. The echo is documented in journals from the 18th century. It's tied to Lady Eleanor's betrayal. To dismiss it as a trick ignores centuries of history." Miss Marple smiled faintly. "History is a fascinating thing, Dr. Marsh, but it's often shaped by those who write it, and sometimes by those who wish to use it." Her words were gentle, but they carried a weight that made Dr. Marsh's eyes narrow. The conversation might have continued, but at that moment the echo sounded again, louder this time, a keening wail that seemed to vibrate. Clara let out a small cry and clutched Roger's arm, her face pale as moonlight. "I can't stand it," she gasped. "It's too much." Before anyone could respond, Clara swayed in her chair, her eyes fluttering closed. Roger caught her. As she slumped, her head lolling against his shoulder, Clara. "Someone fetch a glass of water," he barked, his earlier bravado replaced by panic. Mrs. Grimes hurried to the sideboard, pouring water from a crystal decanter, while Beatrice rose, her hands trembling. "Oh, the poor girl," she murmured. "This wretched curse talk has undone her." Miss Marple, however, remained seated, her eyes fixed on Clara's pale face. She noted the faint flush on the girl's cheeks, the way her fingers twitched slightly against Roger's sleeve. A faint, knowing smile touched her lips. "A most dramatic reaction," she murmured to herself, too softly for anyone else to hear, as Mrs. Grimes returned with the water. Clara stirred, blinking up at Roger with a dazed expression. I'm all right," she whispered. "It was just the sound. It's so dreadful." "Perhaps you should rest, my dear," Beatrice said, her voice full of concern. "This has been a trying evening for us all." "I'll take her upstairs," Roger said, helping Clara to her feet. She leaned heavily against him, her steps unsteady as they left the dining room. Miss Marple watched them go, her mind already turning over the evening's events. The echo Clara's faint, the accusations flung so freely. Each piece was a thread in a tapestry she was beginning to unravel. Once the couple had departed, Beatrice turned to Miss Marple, her expression weary. "Jane, I don't know what to make of this. The household is falling apart, and this cursed nonsense is tearing at our nerves. Do you truly think someone is behind it?" Miss Marple folded her knitting carefully, her movements precise. "I think, Beatrice, that people are rarely as simple as they seem, and when fear is stirred, it often reveals what lies beneath." She paused, her eyes meeting Beatrice's. "I should like to speak with Sir Henry Clithering when he arrives. Tomorrow his perspective might be most illuminating." Beatrice nodded, though her face remained troubled. "Of course, Jane, I trust your judgment, but please be careful. If someone is orchestrating this, they may not take kindly to your questions." Miss Marple's smile was serene. "Oh, I'm quite used to that, my dear. People so often dislike the truth when it's inconvenient." The dinner broke up shortly after, the household dispersing to their respective corners of the manor. Miss Marple lingered in the dining room, her eyes drifting to the window where the moor stretched out, shrouded in darkness. The echo had stopped, but its absence felt almost as unsettling as its presence. She rose, gathering her knitting, and made her way to her room, her mind alight with possibilities. The next morning, the manor was quiet, the tension of the previous night lingering like a fog. Miss Marple rose early, as was her habit, and took a turn about the gardens, her shawl draped over her shoulders against the morning chill. The moor beyond the manor's walls was a stark, wild expanse, its heather and gorse swaying in the breeze. She paused by a low stone wall, her eyes scanning the horizon where the bell tower stood, its silhouette stark against the dawn sky. As she stood there, Tom Finch approached, his boots crunching on the gravel path. "Morning, Miss Marple," he said gruffly, touching the brim of his cap. "Out early, aren't you?" "I find the morning air clears the mind," she replied, her tone pleasant, but her eyes watchful. "You must know this estate well, Mr. Finch. Tell me, have you ever heard the echo before this recent trouble began?" Tom's expression darkened, his hands thrust into his pockets. "Heard it a few times, years back. Old stories, mostly. Never thought much of it till now. Seems to have everyone in a right state." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her voice mild. "And yet, it's curious how it's grown so much louder, isn't it? almost as if someone wanted it to be noticed. Tom's eyes flickered, but he shrugged. Could be the wind, like Mr. Rogers says, or something else. But groundskeepers often see more than they're credited for, don't they? All those quiet corners of an estate like this. Tom grunted, his gaze shifting to the bell tower. Marple said airily, though her eyes never left his face. Tom's jaw tightened, but he said nothing more, tipping his cap again before turning back toward the stables. Miss Marple watched him go, her mind cataloging his unease, his guarded responses. She made a mental note to keep an eye on Mr. Finch. By mid-morning, Sir Henry Clithering's car rolled up the Manor's drive, its tires crunching on the gravel. Miss Marple was waiting in the drawing-room when he arrived, his familiar figure a welcome sight. Sir Henry, with his silver hair and keen eyes. Justice. He greeted Beatrice warmly, then turned to Miss Marple, a twinkle in his eye. Well, Jane, you've landed yourself in another tangle, haven't you? He said, shaking her hand. Beatrice tells me you're chasing ghosts now. Not ghosts, Sir Henry, Miss Marple replied, her voice dry. Merely people who wish us to believe in them. Shall we walk? And its wooden stairs creaking underfoot. Inside, the air was musty, the faint scent of oil and metal lingering. Miss Marple pointed to the corner where she had found the phonograph. Do, Miss Marple said. The echo is too convenient, too perfectly timed, and I suspect it's meant to distract us from something else, perhaps the theft of the emerald necklace. Sir Henry nodded, his expression thoughtful. I've been looking into Tom Finch, as you asked. He's got to record petty theft, mostly from his younger days. Nothing recent, but it's enough to make him a suspect. Anyone else catch your... Miss Marple hesitated, her fingers smoothing her shawl. Feels almost performative. I'd like your help with one thing, Sir Henry. There's a fingerprint on that record. Could you have it analyzed? Sir Henry grinned. Already ahead of you, Jane. I brought a kit from London. Let's see what secrets this phonograph holds. Practiced hands, moving with precision. He found a single clear fingerprint on the edge of the record, which he carefully lifted and sealed in an envelope. I'll send this to a friend at the yard, he said. We'll know soon enough who's been playing ghostly tunes. As they descended the tower, Miss Marple's thoughts were already racing ahead. The fingerprint was a step forward, but it was the motives behind the echo that intrigued her most. Fear, she knew, was a powerful tool, and someone in this household was wielding it with precision. The question was, to what end? The rest of the day passed in a haze of suspicion. Clara kept to her room, claiming a headache, while Roger paced the halls, poring over her notes on the Harrow curse, though Miss Marple noted her frequent glances toward the bell tower at tea. Beatrice tried to restore some semblance of normalcy, but the effort fell flat. The echo had not sounded since Clara's faint, but its absence only heightened the tension, as though the Manor were waiting for the next blow. The necklace, the echo, the strained alabazich was a thread. Just background, of course, he said, glancing at Tom, who stood by the fireplace, his face impassive. No accusations yet. Through the murmur. What interests me, Sir Henry, is not just the past, but the present. Someone stands to gain from our fear, and I suspect they're closer than we think. Her words hung in the air, and for a moment no one spoke. Then Dr. Marsh laughed, a brittle sound. You're quite the detective, Miss Marple, but you're chasing shadows. The curse is real, documented, studied, Proof, Dr. Marsh, is a curious thing. It depends so much on what one chooses to see. Outside, the moor was dark, the moon not yet risen. Miss Marple knew the truth was close, but it would take one final push to bring it to light, and she was ready to make it. Chapter 10. The Phonograph's Secret. The morning sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Moonrise Manor, casting long, wavering shadows across the oak-paneled dining room where Miss Jane Marple sat with a cup of tea, her knitting needles clicking softly. The household was unusually quiet, the eerie echo of the previous night still lingering in everyone's minds. Beatrice Harrow, pale but composed, presided over the breakfast table, though her eyes darted nervously toward the windows facing the moor. Roger Harrow slouched in his chair, sketching absent-mindedly on a napkin, while Clara Weston, his fiancée, picked at her toast, her face drawn and anxious. Mrs. Grimes, the stern housekeeper, moved briskly about, her lips pursed as if guarding a secret. Tom Finch, the groundskeeper, was absent, likely tending to the estate's sprawling grounds, and Dr. Evelyn Marsh, the folklorist, sat with a book open in her lap, though her eyes were fixed on Miss Marple. Miss Marple's sharp gaze missed nothing. The tension in the room was palpable, each person wrapped in their own thoughts, their own fears. The echo, that haunting wail that had disturbed the manor for nights, was no longer just a ghostly rumor, was a puzzle, and Miss Marple was determined to fit its pieces together. Her visit to the bell tower the previous day had confirmed her suspicions. The ghostly sound was no supernatural phenomenon, but a deliberate, man-made ruse. The discovery of the phonograph, hidden in the tower's shadowed recesses, had been a revelation, though she had kept it to herself for now. The scratched record, the dusty needle, the faint scent of oil on the mechanism, they all pointed to someone in the household orchestrating the eerie wails to unsettle the manor. But who and why? As she sipped her tea, Miss Marple considered the motives. The stolen emerald necklace, Lady Eleanor's heirloom, was at the heart of this mystery. She was certain its theft had coincided with the first echoes, reviving talk of the old Harrow curse. Was the echo a distraction, meant to keep the household focused on ghosts rather than thieves? Or was it something deeper, tied to the tangled relationships and hidden grudges she sensed among the residents? Roger's debts, Clara's secretive trips, Mrs. Grimes's defensiveness, Tom's murky past, and Dr. Marsh's obsession with the Kursaal were threads in a tapestry Miss Marple was carefully unpicking. "Jane, you're awfully quiet this morning," Lady Beatrice said, breaking the silence. Her voice was light, but there was a tremor in it. "I do hope you're not too shaken by last night's disturbance." Miss Marple smiled gently, setting her teacup down. "Oh, not at all, Beatrice. I find these little mysteries rather invigorating. The echo, you see, is not so mysterious once one considers the mechanics of sound." Dr. Marsh's head snapped up, her book forgotten. "The mechanics of sound," she echoed, her tone sharp. "What do you mean by that, Miss Marple?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled behind her spectacles. "Only that sound can be manipulated, my dear, amplified, distorted, even recorded. The bell tower, for instance, has excellent acoustics, an ideal place for creative effects." The room grew still. Roger's pencil paused mid-stroke, and Clara's fork clattered against her plate. Mrs. Grimes, who had just entered with a fresh pot of tea, froze in the doorway, her face a mask of suspicion. Beatrice glanced nervously between her guests. sensing the shift in atmosphere. Are you suggesting the echo isn't natural? Roger asked, his voice cautious. He leaned forward, his dark eyes narrowing. You think someone's behind it? Miss Marple folded her hands in her lap, her expression serene. I think, Roger, that people are far more inventive than ghosts, and far more motivated by earthly concerns. Clara let out a small gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. But who would do such a thing? And why? It's terrifying. All of us waking in the night, hearing that awful wail. Fear is a powerful tool, Miss Marple said softly. It distracts, confuses, keeps us looking one way while something else happens in the shadows. Dr. Marsh closed her book with a snap. This is nonsense, she said, her voice clipped. The echo is tied to the Harrow curse, as I've documented extensively. Lady Eleanor's spirit? Oh, come now, Evelyn, Beatrice interrupted, her patience fraying. You've been filling our heads with that curse nonsense for weeks. If Jane says there's a rational explanation, I'm inclined to believe her. Dr. Marsh's cheeks flushed, but she said nothing, her fingers tightening around her book. Miss Marple noted the reaction, filing it away. The folklorist's obsession with the curse was genuine, but was it a cover for something else? Her defensiveness about the bell tower yesterday had not gone unnoticed. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Sir Henry Clithering, who strode into the dining room with his usual brisk energy. His presence, authoritative yet warm, seemed to steady the room. Miss Marple had telephoned him the previous evening, asking for his assistance, and he had driven from London at first light. Good morning all, Sir Henry said, nodding to Beatrice. I hope I'm not intruding. Jane, you mentioned something about a phonograph. A collective intake of breath rippled through the room. Miss Marple's lips twitched into a faint smile. She had not intended for Sir Henry to reveal her discovery so soon. But his bluntness was, as always, a useful catalyst. A phonograph, Beatrice exclaimed, her eyes wide. Jane, what's this about? Miss Marple set her knitting aside, and rose, her movements deliberate. Perhaps it's best we show you, Beatrice. Sir Henry, would you accompany me to the bell tower? I believe the household should see this for themselves. The group followed her, a reluctant procession, through the manor's drafty corridors and up the narrow winding stairs to the bell tower. The air grew colder as they ascended, the stone walls damp and mossy. The tower was seldom used, its ancient bell long silent, but it commanded a view of the moor that stretched bleakly toward the horizon. Miss Marple led the way to a shadowed corner where a dusty tarpaulin lay crumpled on the floor. She pulled it aside, revealing the phonograph, sturdy, old-fashioned model with a brass horn and a turntable still holding a scratched record. Good heavens, Beatrice whispered, stepping closer. What is this doing here? It's rather clever, really, Miss Marple said, her tone conversational. A phonograph can record and play sounds a whale, for instance, that might be mistaken for a ghost. Played at the right moment, with the tower's acoustics, it would carry across the moor, creating quite the eerie effect. Roger swore under his breath, his hands shoved deep in his pockets. So you're saying someone's been faking the ghost? That's diabolical. Clara clung to his arm, her face pale. But who would do that, and why? Mrs. Grimes crossed her arms, her eyes narrowing. This is outrageous. I've worked here for 20 years, and I've never seen such a thing. If you're suggesting one of us, I'm suggesting nothing yet. Miss Marple said calmly. "But I did find something curious." She bent down and pointed to the record, where a single, clear fingerprint was visible in the dust. "Sir Henry, perhaps you could have this analyzed. Scotland Yard's resources are rather more advanced than my knitting needles." Sir Henry chuckled, though his eyes were serious. "Already on it, Jane. I've brought a kit with me. We'll lift the print and send it to the lab in London. Should have results by tomorrow." Dr. Marsh stepped forward, her expression a mix of curiosity and unease. "A fingerprint. That's hardly conclusive. Anyone could have touched that old thing. It's probably been here for years." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild. "But it's odd, don't you think, that the dust around it is disturbed, as if it's been used recently, and the record scratched, but not worn out. It's been played, and not long ago." The group exchanged uneasy glances. Tom Finch, who had joined them silently, leaned against the wall, his weathered face unreadable. Miss Marple watched him closely, noting the way his eyes darted toward Dr. Marsh. There was a connection there. She was sure of it, though its nature eluded her. As they descended from the tower, Sir Henry pulled Miss Marple aside. "You're stirring the pot, Jane," he said, his voice low. "That fingerprint's a good lead, but it's not enough. We need to know who had access to the tower, and who knew enough about phonographs to pull this off." "Indeed," Miss Marple said, her eyes distant. "But more than that, we need to understand why. The echo, the necklace, the curse, they're all connected. Henry, someone is weaving a story, and I intend to find the author." The rest of the day passed in a haze of suspicion. Beatrice, shaken by the phonograph's discovery, retired to her room, while Roger and Clara argued in hushed tones in the garden. Mrs. Grimes bustled about with even more intensity, her usual efficiency tinged with agitation. Tom Finch disappeared to the stables, claiming work to do, and Dr. Marsh buried herself in her notes, though Miss Marple caught her watching the others with a calculating gaze. That evening, Sir Henry and Miss Marple sat in the Manor's library, a fire crackling in the hearth. The fingerprint kit lay open on the table, and Sir Henry was carefully packaging the lifted print for transport to London. "You're certain about this phonograph business, Jane?" he asked, sealing the envelope. "It's a clever trick, but it doesn't explain the necklace's theft." "But consider the timing, Henry. The echo began the night the necklace vanished. It's kept the household on edge, distracted from the real crime, and the person behind it, they're clever, but not infallible. That fingerprint was careless." Sir Henry nodded, leaning back in his chair. "You suspect someone specific, don't you?" Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "I have my thoughts, but I'd rather not say until we have the fingerprint results. People are so unpredictable, you know. Like my nephew Raymond's friend, Mr. Carter, who thought he could cheat at cards without anyone noticing. It's always the little mistakes that give them away." Sir Henry laughed. "You and your village. Parallels. I swear, Jane, you could solve a murder with nothing but a knitting pattern and a cup of tea." "Perhaps," she said, smiling. "But for now, let's keep an eye on Dr. Marsh." She was far too interested in that phonograph and her work on "The Curse" gives her a motive. Fame, Henry, it's a powerful draw for some." As they spoke, a faint sound drifted through the open window, a low, mournful wail, unmistakable even in the quiet night. Sir Henry's head snapped up. The echo again. But how? We've got the phonograph. Miss Marple's needles paused. Interesting, she murmured. Either our culprit has another device, or they're desperate to keep the illusion alive. Come, Henry, let's take a walk. They slipped out into the moonlit garden, the moor stretching dark and endless before them. The wail came again, fainter now, but distinct. Miss Marple tilted her head, listening. It's not coming from the tower, she said softly. It's closer to the stables. They moved quietly, the grass damp underfoot. The stables loomed ahead, a low stone building half hidden by ivy. A faint light flickered inside. Sir Henry drew his flashlight, and they crept closer, peering through a cracked window. Lift from a spinning record. Not so fast, Miss Marple cautioned. Tom may be playing the record, but is he the mastermind? Let's watch a moment longer. They waited, hidden in the shadows. Tom glanced nervously toward the door, then stopped the gramophone and hid it beneath a pile of hay. As he slipped out of the stables, Miss Marple noted the tension in his movements, the way he scanned the darkness. He was afraid not of ghosts, but of being caught back in the library. He's not the sort to devise a scheme like this. Someone's directing him, someone with a better understanding of the manners, history, and acoustics. Dr. Marsh again, Sir Henry asked. Possibly, Miss Marple said, but we mustn't jump to conclusions. The fingerprint will tell us more, and Clara, her trips to the jeweler are troubling. She's hiding something, Henry, and I suspect it's tied to Roger's debts. Sir Henry rubbed his chin. You think the necklace theft and the echo are part of the same crime? I do, Miss Marple said. But it's not just about money. There's pride, ambition, perhaps even revenge at play. The next morning, the household gathered for breakfast, the air thick with unspoken accusations. Dr. Marsh was quieter than usual, her eyes darting. To Miss Marple, whenever she thought no one was watching, Clara clung to Roger, her hands trembling, while Mrs. Grimes snapped at a maid for spilling coffee. His hands fidgeting with his cap, Sir Henry received a telegram from London just before noon. He read it quickly, then passed it to Miss Marple. The fingerprint on the phonograph record belonged to Dr. Evelyn Marsh. Well, Jane, Sir Henry said, his voice low. Looks like your instincts were right. Shall we confront her? Not yet, Miss Marple said, folding the telegram. Let's give her a little rope. People reveal themselves when they think they're safe. And I have a feeling Dr. Marsh is about to make another mistake. Poring over her notes, but twice Miss Marple caught her slipping out to the tower, glancing over her shoulder. When the echo sounded again that night, Miss Marple was ready. She and Sir Henry followed the sound, not to the tower, but to a small shed near the moor's edge, where Dr. Marsh was adjusting another phonograph, her face illuminated by a lantern. Got you, sir, Henry muttered, stepping forward. Dr. Marsh spun around, her eyes wide with panic. This isn't what it looks like, she stammered. I was researching the echo, testing a theory. Miss Marple stepped into the light, her expression serene but unyielding. A theory, Dr. Marsh, or a deception? You've been using these phonographs to fake Lady Eleanor's wail, haven't you? To stir up fear, to make your research on the curse seem vital. But why academic glory, or something more personal? Dr. Marsh's shoulders slumped, her defiance crumbling. You don't understand, she whispered. The curse is real. I've seen the records, the diaries, and the necklace, Miss Marple pressed. Did you take it to fund your work, or to frame someone else. Dr. Marsh's eyes darted away, and Miss Marple knew she had struck a nerve. The folklorist was guilty, but the full story was still unfolding. As Sir Henry escorted her back to the manor, Miss Marple's mind raced. The echo was solved, but the necklace remained missing, and Clara's confession loomed on the horizon. The mystery was far from over, but Miss Marple felt the threads tightening. Someone in the household was still hiding the truth, and she would not rest until it was laid bare.